Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. It only takes just a quick second and it helps out the channel immensely. Let's see if we could reach 3 likes on this one. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated. I do post content just like this all of the time. I very much enjoy what I do and I plan on being here for a very, very long time. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax. Enjoy the 2 hours of horror stories with no mid-roll ads, except for the ad right after this intro. There won't be any more after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. There was a rule on our ship that everyone had to follow. Never go outside after midnight. Last night, we broke it. Working on a shipping vessel is tough. The physical labor, constant seasickness, and isolation from the outside world take a toll. Some men prefer solitude, but I'm not one of them. Back home, I have a wife and a small girl called Emily, whom I love dearly. I will never get used to seeing their sad faces when I have to leave. It's daunting, but the camaraderie here is something you'll hardly find anywhere else. I'm going off to sleep. Don't go walking around outside, alright? The captain said, smiling. Can't promise that, Cap, James said. They both laughed and the captain walked away. I looked at James in bewilderment. No one told you yet, huh? James said. Tell me what? You can't go outside the bridge area past midnight. What if the fog sets in and your radar stops working? Still ain't going out. Are you messing with me? No, sir. James looked dead serious. That makes no sense, I said. It ain't gotta make sense, but you gonna follow it. What if I have to go out? Then you ain't gonna come back. He bent forward and stared into my eyes. Look. We're in a deep part of the Atlantic. Strange things happen here. Decades before you were born, all the fishermen and crewmen here made a pact. I'm not gonna let you break it. He leaned back and kicked his feet on a chair. How about you tell me about your family? You got one? I tried to get more out of him, but he wouldn't answer. We got to talking about other things, but what he said still loomed in my head. And then I told him not even a whale could eat that much. I burst out laughing. James was slapping his leg, rocking back and forth with laughter. I looked out. The sun was coming up. Another beautiful day at the sea. The seagulls were flying by and the smell of sea salt was in the air. Is it safe to go out now, James? I said and chuckled. James' demeanor changed. The smile was gone from his face and he stared deep into my eyes. Billy, this ain't no laughing matter. He got up, collected his things, and walked to his cabin. The next shift I got there early, excited to spend another night talking with James. He was already sitting in his chair. Her name's Emily. She's just turned 3, I said, showing James my daughter's picture. Ain't she beautiful? Hey Cap, come take a look. The captain walked over from the control panel and looked down. She really is. She definitely didn't get it from you, Bill. Both he and James started laughing loudly. I laughed too, although a little hurt. This was the first time the captain spoke to me informally. Young Billy here has been asking about the midnight rule. You think it's time you tell him? Why wouldn't I? He's stuck with us here for another 2 weeks. At least he won't do anything stupid. My eyes opened in excitement, and I leaned closer to the captain. James saw it and raised his eyebrow at me. Look, Bill, for a long time, ships that would fish in this part of the Atlantic would lose all their crewmen. The story was always the same. The communication would stop abruptly, and the ship would stay dead in its place. The Coast Guard would then venture out and find an empty vessel, almost as if no one had ever been on it. One day, a young seaman was found hidden inside one of them. He said that the night crew didn't come back the same, and soon murdered everyone. He was the sole survivor. The officers suspected him, but the young man hanged himself soon after. I looked at them in disbelief, but their expressions were ice cold. Do you believe all that? I don't know, Bill. No one knows if what he said was true, but since his story came out, all the ships that fish here stopped letting their crew out at night. It hasn't happened since. Hey, my pa told me the same story. He used to fish around here too. You don't have to believe it, Bill, but respect it. Sure will, Captain. Good. Now, where's that whiskey you got, James? That's what I like to hear, Cap. James walked away to the deck. You and your wife still together, Bill? Yes, Captain. Beautiful. I used to have a wife, too. Unfortunately, things didn't work out. Life at sea doesn't help relationships. You're still young and smart, Bill. Get out while you have the chance. This, coming from the captain, startled me. James, meanwhile, returned with the whiskey and poured each of us a hefty dose. To Bill's family. The captain yelled and chugged down the drink. James quickly followed. The captain stayed with us through the night shift, drinking heavily. When the sun rose, I could barely stand. The captain and James were already waiting in their chairs with shots of whiskey when I came in the next night. Ready for another night, Bill? The captain asked and handed me a drink. Sure thing, Captain. Hey, Cap, Billy Boy is learning. James screamed out and slapped his knee. We were already a few drinks deep when the boat started moving around more. I looked out. My vision was blurred, but I could see storm clouds forming in the sky. Hell of a storm coming, gentlemen, James said. That's a big one, James. Don't you puke on me, Billy, if the boat starts rocking, James said. Only if you don't throw up at me first, I fired back. We all started laughing, but my chest tightened as I glanced out at the storm above the sea. Soon the boat was rocking violently back and forth. I was holding a bucket, throwing up all the whiskey I consumed, barely able to open my eyes. Good thing we got him that bucket, James laughed. But then a strange, loud sound came from outside, like steel being scraped around. Both the captain and James perked up. I could hear the captain mumble, "The gear is moving." They both looked at each other, their eyes wide with terror, and laughter had long left their faces. They both rushed to the window and looked out. James took off his hat and started crumpling it in his hands. "What's the time?" the captain whispered. 12:05, James said quietly. Who hired these incompetent fools? The captain yelled out and threw his hat across the room. He started pacing back and forth, looking down at the ground. Then the scraping again. The whole ship tilted the other way. There was genuine fear in their eyes. The captain looked at the clock again. "Bill, are you fit to operate?" "I guess so," I mumbled. "Okay, James, you and I will go out on the deck and reattach the chains. That should stop the equipment from moving." "Captain, but it's past 12. "I know," the captain screamed out. "But do we have a choice? If we don't do anything, the ship will go down." The captain walked over to the closet, pulled out the raincoats and harnesses, and threw them at James and me. "Let's go." He put on his coat and walked out. Outside, the weather was horrible. Hard, heavy rain with lightning in the distance. The waves crashed hard into the ship, spilling water onto the deck. I had to use all my willpower to hold the puke. We put the harnesses on and clipped in. The captain stayed back to watch and guide our process. Only now did I look at James. Terror was in his eyes. The captain yelled out to move the boxes of equipment to secure the gear, then to take the safety chains and reattach them. We quickly got to work. Each move on the deck felt like hell. Waves kept crashing into the ship, splashing water into our faces. The boxes were heavy. My body was so weak. But James pushed hard and we managed to block the gear for a while. "Get the chains now. The chains," the captain yelled. We took the chains and started reattaching the gear. The chains felt heavy, and reattaching them to the wet floor made it so much harder. I could feel my muscles slowly giving out. James had to rush over and help me attach them. I was so weak that he had to pull me off the ground. "It's done. Get out. Get out." James was already running back. I followed behind him. The captain unfastened the harness and we all walked back, locking the door behind us. We all stood in the hall panting. The air in the ship felt cold. Every piece of my clothing was wet. I slid down to the floor and put my head on my knees. The captain and James were looking at each other, then at me, and back at each other. "Maybe the things ain't like storms," James said. "Yeah, probably," the captain replied. James helped me back up, and we slowly walked towards the bridge area. Each stair felt like a mountain. I walked behind the captain. He now had a very fishy smell. When we got to the bridge area, I sat back in the chair. My mind was empty. The captain was walking around the room, looking at all the shelves and controls. James sat back into his chair, opened up the bottle, and took a chug out of it. "Sorry, couldn't wait." "No problem," the captain replied. James poured out some whiskey for all of us. He tried to hand me the glass, but I declined. My stomach was still recovering. He then gave one to the captain. The captain twirled the drink around, looking at the whiskey under the light, sniffing the glass. A chill ran down my spine. I looked closely at him. He kept examining the liquid. James wasn't paying attention anymore, pouring himself another shot. The captain took a sip and immediately spit it out. "What is this?" His face twisted in disgust. "It's some good whiskey, Cap. Ain't like it no more?" The captain looked at him with one eyebrow raised, then looked down at the ground. "Say, how many men are on this ship?" James' eyes widened and he dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor. We both looked at each other and started slowly backing away. "What's the matter?" the captain asked. James?" I whispered, my voice shaking. The captain looked deep into my eyes. His pupils had turned a dark red color. He flashed a smile and ran towards me. He put his hand on my neck and lifted me off the ground. I started choking, trying to fight his hand off, but he was too strong. I looked at James in desperation. He had walked over to the shelf and started frantically searching with his hand until he pulled out a gun. He slowly pointed it up at the captain, his hands shaking. He then pressed down the trigger, but nothing, just a click. James looked down under it. The gun wasn't loaded. Blood froze in my veins. The captain looked back, let out a blood-curdling scream, dropped me to the ground and ran towards James. He pushed him to the ground and started violently scratching and tearing into him with his teeth. My feet were rooted to the ground. Soon his screams turned into a low gurgling and then silence. Only when the thing looked up did I open the door and run down. I could hear the thing's screams echoing through the hall. I'm locked down in the vault of the engine room. The steel door is the only thing keeping me alive. In the first few hours, I had been hearing the screams of crewmates calling out in pain. When the last scream died down, the thing called out to me in the captain's voice, saying it was safe now. I didn't answer. It then started slamming into the door. The vault is shaking with each thud. I have no idea how long it will hold. I'm making this post for my wife and daughter. Even in these tense moments, I'm held up by the thought of them. Please don't forget your father, no matter what happens. We weren't supposed to be there. That wasn't part of the thrill for Evan. He just liked doing things he wasn't supposed to do. Especially when no one was around to tell him to stop. The cemetery was quiet, old, and fenced off after dark, which made it perfect in his eyes. I followed him over the fence because I always did. The gravel paths crunched under our shoes as we walked between the stones. Evan kicked a pebble ahead of him, laughing softly, like we were somewhere harmless. I kept my flashlight low, more focused on where I was stepping than on what surrounded us. "Relax," he said. "It's just a bunch of rocks." I didn't answer. I already regretted coming. The air felt different farther in. Not colder exactly, just heavier. The trees lining the cemetery pressed closer together, their branches tangling overhead. The wind moved through them in uneven bursts, stirring leaves and loose debris along the ground. That was when I first heard it. At first it sounded like the wind catching in the stones, a thin, breathy sound that faded in and out. I ignored it. Cemeteries have a way of amplifying normal noises until they feel like something else. But as we walked, it kept coming back. Not loud, not clear, just close enough that I found myself listening for it. "What?" Evan asked, when he noticed me slowing. "Nothing," I said, and I meant it. I didn't have anything solid to point to. We reached a section where the graves thinned, opening into a wider stretch of ground. At the far end stood a mausoleum, larger than the others, its stone pale and worn. The door wasn't fully closed, just slightly ajar. Evan grinned when he saw it. "Now that's interesting." We walked up to it without hesitation. Shining his light along the surface, I stayed back, telling myself it was just nerves. Just my imagination working overtime. Up close, it was plain. No statues, no carvings worth mentioning. Just a family name etched above the doorway. The letters shone shallow with age. Evan leaned toward the gap in the door, angling his flashlight inside. "Doesn't look like much," he said. I was about to agree when something caught my eye. For a split second, I saw movement at the edge of the opening, pale against the dark. Fingers curled over the stone. A hand. It twitched once, then slid back into the darkness. I sucked in a breath. "Evan?" He turned. "What?" The doorway was empty again. Just shadow. Just stone. I stopped. The words felt stupid the moment they reached my mouth. "Nothing. Never mind." He laughed it off. "You're freaking yourself out." Maybe I was. We moved on, but not far. The paths twisted and looped in ways that made it hard to tell where we were. More than once I glanced back and saw the mausoleum again, closer than I expected. "I thought we'd gone further," I said. "All these rows look the same," Evan replied. "You're fine." Eventually he drifted back toward it without saying it outright. When he stopped in front of the doorway again, something in my chest tightened. "I'm just gonna take a quick look," he said. 2 seconds. "Don't," I said. He was already slipping inside. The sound of him scraping against the stone vanished the moment he crossed the threshold. "Evan?" I called. No answer. I waited, called his name again. Louder. Nothing. The cemetery continued like nothing was wrong. Wind in the trees, leaves shifting, normal night sounds that should have been comforting. They weren't. I stood there longer than I meant to, telling myself he was messing with me, that he'd pop out at any second. Then the wind shifted, brushing against my back instead of my face, carrying the dry, stale smell of old stone. I stepped away from the doorway without realizing why. That was when the whispers came back. Not clear, not loud, just fragments, drifting around me instead of from any one place. I called Evan's name again. The whispers stopped. The silence that followed felt intentional. I turned. Evan was standing behind me, close enough that I startled. "There you are," I said, relief hitting me hard. "What the hell was that?" "I'm here," he said. His voice sounded normal, flat maybe, but normal enough that I tried to calm down. I laughed shakily, already preparing to apologize for overreacting. Then I really looked at him. His jacket was dusty along one sleeve. His eyes were open a little wider than usual. He didn't blink. "Did you hear me calling you?" I asked. He hesitated. "Yeah." "You didn't answer." "I was farther in than I thought." Something about the way he said it made my stomach drop. "You should come see," he added. "It explains things." "No," I said. I want to leave. He stepped closer. You are making this harder than it needs to be. I backed up. He adjusted with me, keeping the distance between us the same. His hand brushed my sleeve. Cold, too firm. I pulled away. His grip closed around my wrist. You're taking too long, he said. That was it. I twisted free and ran. I didn't know where I was going. The cemetery blurred around me, stones flashing past in uneven rows. I didn't hear footsteps behind me. That was worse than being chased. I stopped in a clearing where the graves stood farther apart. That's where I saw them. Figures between the stones. Too tall, too narrow. Watching. And near the mausoleum, Evan, standing upright, too still. My light rose. Hands that weren't his held firm from behind. Fingers sunk deep into his torso to keep him upright. His chest was open. Ribs spread, empty inside. His throat was ruined. His eyes were open and dead. The thing behind him lifted Evan's arm and waved. I ran. I didn't stop until the fence tore my hands and the streetlights burned my eyes. No one followed me. They let me leave. I still don't know why. Every night at exactly 8:35, my father would secure the front door, the lock on the knob, 2 locks up top, one with a chain, another a latch, a child-proof doorknob cover, and last of all, a door stopper was wedged as far beneath it as he could manage. No minute too late, no minute too early. It was a ritualistic chore, one my mother used to just shrug off with a, "Your father just likes being safe." I remember the first time I'd caught him doing it. It was 8:35, and I was just about to drift off to sleep when I heard shouting from down the hall. "What have I always told you, woman? 8:35. Jim, please. I let you do this idiotic ritual every night for 9 years. Don't you dare yell at me." "Well, I wouldn't have to if you'd listen. It needs to be done at 35, not 33. Undo that goddamn lock." A huff of frustration was quickly followed by the jingle of various locks before the door creaked open. "I just can't with you tonight." The shuffle of fabric. "I'm going out for a walk." "Irene, do not go out there. They'll come after you and I won't go out there to save you." "I'll take my chances." "Irene." The door slammed shut behind my mother just as I crept out from the hallway. I saw my father give the door an angry stare before he whipped around with a grumble about needing a drink. He began to stomp away to the kitchen before noticing me in the shadows. The anger from before drained instantly. "Hey buddy, you're supposed to be sleeping." My arms tightened around the stuffed toy in them. I heard yelling. "Is mommy okay?" My father sighed. "Your mother just... she needed some time to herself." "Is she going to be okay?" "She..." A pause. I watched his face sadden. "I don't know, buddy." My face paled. The toy fell from my arms. My father seemed to sense the shift in the air, and quickly dropped to one knee so his hands could wrap over my shoulders. "Hey, it's going to be okay. Your mom's a fighter. If anyone can survive out there, it's her." "Survive?" Lips pulled back in a grimace. His hands tightened for only a moment before falling away as he rose to his feet. "Did I say survive? No, I meant, The words died on my father's tongue as a melody began to play from his back pocket. I watched as his face went white as a sheet, before heavy footsteps barreled in the direction of the front door. Each lock clicked into place, at rapid speed thanks to muscle memory. I walked up to my father just as he was starting to kick the door stopper into place. "Daddy, what's going on? Isn't Mommy still outside?" "Not now, buddy." After one last kick, he began to run around the house, shutting off every light and pulling closed every curtain. When the house was well secured, my father scooped me into his arms and carried me to the couch where he dropped onto it with a grunt. "Dad?" A large hand covered my mouth before I could try to say anything else. Frustrated, I tried to lift my arms, but they were bound against my sides by my father's own, which held me securely against his chest. My head strained to look back, my legs kicked at the air. I opened my mouth to scream just against his palm when I heard it. Rattle, click, rattle. My father held me tighter as prayers fell from his mouth. "Heavenly Father, I come to you in the name of Jesus, acknowledging your power and sovereignty." Rattle, rattle. "I pray for your divine protection over me and my loved ones. Surround us with your angels and create a hedge of safety around us." A knock. "Jim?" I felt my father shift from behind me, felt the hand over my mouth loosen. "Jim, this isn't funny. Open this door right now." "Mommy?" As soon as the word left my mouth, the hand was back against it. My father shuffled us further against the back of the couch. "Guard us from harm, both seen and unseen, and keep us secure in your loving care." "Jim!" My mother knocked angrily at the door. "Won't you just... oh, hello. Hi. Could you help me?" I could feel tears wetting the back of my neck. "I trust in your promise that no weapon formed against us shall prosper." "My husband locked me out of the house. If you could just... wait. No, stop, get away from me." "In Jesus' name I pray. I pray." The door shook like something had been thrown against it. The world fell silent as my mother's screams and begs for mercy echoed into the night, mixing with the soft sound of my father crying into my hair. I was in shock. What sort of monster was currently taking my mother from me? Why wasn't anyone helping? Why weren't we helping? Amen, 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 amen. We held her funeral 2 weeks later. It was a small thing. My aunts and uncles, a few cousins, and my grandparents who babysat me while my father attended to everything. There was no body to put in the casket, so we placed a few of my mom's most precious possessions in her place. An old music box from her parents, a pair of shoes from when I was a baby, and a framed photo of our family. I remember small parts of the event, mainly how people yelled and scolded my father for not doing something, for hiding like a coward while my mom was out there all alone. He didn't fight back. He just sat in one of the foldable chairs with the most defeated look on his face. That was 15 years ago. Since then, my father has been different, quiet and skittish, like a baby deer. I was pulled out of school and was taught exclusively at home. I didn't have many friends, and the few I had could only come to my house. I couldn't go to theirs. But no one wants to come to the house of the kid whose dad checks on him every half hour, whose dad has over 20 locks on the front door, and just as many on the windows, whose dad insisted every bedroom door be open at all times, so if anything happened he could get there as soon as possible, whose dad was afraid of losing what little family he had left. But I'm 24 now. I have a girlfriend, somehow. One who understands my father to the best of her abilities. She never questioned our small practices, and always respected his 3 house rules. 1. Always come over before 8 p.m. 2. Never unlock the doors or windows until at least 9 in the morning. 3. Always say nightly prayers before bed. We were supposed to meet for lunch, but something had happened at her job, so we postponed it until later that night. My father was more than happy to have her over, and spent a good few hours preparing dinner. I could see him giving the clock a glance every time he walked past it. Could see the way his hands began to twitch with nervousness the closer the clock's hands got to 7, and when they finally reached 8:15, he was in full panic mode. "Maybe you two should reschedule for tomorrow," he said while pulling back the window curtain to peek out at the street. "Dad, it's okay. Elowen sent me a text that she was on her way like 5 minutes ago." But the building is at least 20 minutes away. What if there's traffic? An accident? You have to call her and tell her to go straight home. Dad. Son, please. He turned to me, eyes wide with terror. Trembling hands grasped the front of my shirt. Call her. I hadn't heard my father talk like that in a long time. The way his words trembled like he was on the verge of tears. The layer of fear that clung to him like barbed wire. I hadn't heard him speak like that since the night my mother passed. So I nodded, took out my phone and called Elowen. The phone rang 3 times before her voice crackled to life on the other end. Charlie? Elowen, how far are you from my house? I don't know, like maybe 13 minutes. Why? What's wrong? Okay, I need you to get over here now, or try to get to your parents' place. Just race over to either one. What, like, go over the speed limit? If you have to. Charlie, I'm not breaking the law. I don't care about the law, just... I felt my father tug the phone from my hand and turned just in time to see him put it to his ear. Elowen, you listen to me right now. No, you are gonna shut up and listen. He glared briefly in my direction before looking at the floor. This isn't a game. It's life or death. Now, you are gonna put your foot on the pedal and get over to a house. I tried to reach for the phone, but my father pressed his hand to my chest to keep me back. I could hear Elowen's voice on the other end shout briefly in anger before it settled. Another minute passed before he finally relaxed. Thank you. Now, I'm serious. You hurry over here, and if you can't get here in time, just lock the car and lay on the floor in the back. I'll pray for you. She said something, probably a thank you or a goodbye, before he hung up and tossed the phone onto the nearby couch. He let out a heavy sigh and ran a hand through graying hair. She's on her way. A beat of silence. His smile was weak. Come on, let's get something in our bellies before she gets here. I made a good pot roast. It's 8:34 now. She's not here. I was pacing around the living room, pinky nail caught between teeth. My eyes kept drifting to the front door where my father stood, waiting for the alarm on his phone to chime. But we couldn't do the locks. We just couldn't. Not with Elowen still out there. I grabbed my coat and walked to the door, but my hand was smacked just as it reached for the knob. Ow, Dad, what the hell? Don't even think about it. It's 1 minute till 35. Yeah, and Elowen's still out there. I have to go get her. No, you don't. If she's smart, she'll do what I said and stay in the car. All we can do is wait until morning. Like hell, I'm going to get her. I tried to push past him, but my father elbowed me in the chest and knocked me onto my butt. I barely had time to register what happened before that familiar melody began to play, and he started shifting the locks into place. I was able to reach out and grab onto his pant leg before he could start kicking in the door stopper. Dad, please, we can't leave her out there. I could barely make out the shift in his expression, the way his brows met and his lips pulled downwards. He didn't want to leave her to the beast outside. He didn't want to risk her having the same fate as my mother. I know he wanted to go out there, but he didn't. Instead, he placed a gentle hand to the top of my head and pushed. My back hit the floor as the sounds of him kicking the doorstop echoed off the walls. My chest felt hollow. My body felt like it was made of steel. I prayed silently in my head for Elowen's protection and for forgiveness. I know I didn't deserve it. I was leaving her like a sheep in a den full of wolves. But I knew the dangers. My father knew the dangers. I could only hope that she understood it too. Charlie? My father bent at my side. Let's go say our prayers. I don't remember how he got me off the floor and to the table, but suddenly I was sitting across from him and watching him light a lavender-scented candle. My favorite. Once the candle was lit, he set the lighter down and brought his hands together over the table. A few seconds passed before he gave an encouraging smile. Do you want to do the prayer today? I didn't say anything. I just put my hands together and closed my eyes. Lord, we pray for the safety and protection of our family members. Keep us safe from harm and lead us. Rattle. My father's chair squeaked as he moved. I cleared my throat. Lead us in the paths of righteousness. Knock, knock. Charlie. The chair fell over as I stood, eyes opening to stare in the direction of the front door. Elowen? I heard my father stand up. Charlie, I'm here. Open the door. I'm coming. Just hold on. I made a run for the door, but my father was quick to grab the back of my shirt. Limbs flailed as I fell back. Let go of me. Elowen! His hands covered my mouth as I tried to scream out to her, to let her know that I hadn't forgotten her, that I wouldn't let anything happen to her. Charlie, stop! He hissed as I threw myself around in an attempt to loosen his grip. He only held on tighter. You can't. Charlie, please. I know I'm late. I'm sorry, but let me... Oh, hello. We both froze, listening in as Elowen spoke to whatever was out there with her. I could hear the fear in her words growing stronger as she knocked desperately on the door one last time. When her scream broke, though, I panicked. My head reeled back to uncover my mouth before it opened to bite down against my father's thumb. He yelped in pain as I bit down harder, enough to draw blood. The metallic taste coated my tongue as he dropped me to clutch his hand in pain. Me? I bolted to the door. I'm coming, Elowen, I shouted while kicking at the door stopper, until it came loose and skidded across the floor. I pulled back each lock and cupped the cover with both hands to throw open the door. I was going to run out in some heroic act of bravery, but one foot was barely out the door before I froze in place. Out on the porch was Elowen, cornered against the railing with a pocket knife in her hand. One of her eyes was squeezed shut and bleeding. 5 long scratches running along it to her jaw. She looked in my direction and whimpered, mouthing the words, "Help me." The person, no, monster above her, slowly turned to me. It was human-shaped, but wrong. Its knees were bent backwards, and the arms went all the way down to the floor. Its body was entirely black, like you were looking into a void. It was also entirely naked, though it wasn't like you were able to see anything because, again, it was black. But it had a mask, a plastic one where you could only see the eyes, which seemed to glow an ominous red, and they were looking right at me. The creature made a soft clicking noise as its body turned fully, clawed hands dragging along the porch, its head cocked to the side like a curious bird as I took a step back into the house. I could hear my father somewhere behind me running to the other end, probably to get a weapon, hopefully to get a weapon. Meanwhile, I was stuck with this thing that was slowly coming towards me. In a panic, my hands shot out in a stop motion. "Get out of here," I shouted, stomping my foot once like I was trying to scare away a wild animal. "Stay away from us." To be fair, it did stop. For about 5 seconds. Then it lunged, knocking me onto the ground so hard I could feel the breath in my lungs give out. It didn't attack, though. It hovered over me like a beast, letting out short clicks as its mask twitched and pressed against the sides of my face, like it was searching for something. I tried to lift my arms to push it off, but it was quick to restrain them above my head. I tried to shout, but the words died in my throat. All I could do was watch as those horrid eyes met mine once more. It clicked. One hand dragged up to the mask and lifted it. Its face was just as empty as the rest of it, the only exception being the 2 beady red eyes that refused to look away. Another click. I leaned in and nudged its face against my mouth. I watched as those same eyes grew wider in horrifying delight. It smelled blood. My dad's blood. The blood currently drying on my chin. My eyes widened in fear as I watched it sit up above me, its clicks making a melody that almost sounded like laughter. A line formed on its face and slowly opened. A mouth, one filled with razor-sharp teeth and a split tongue that danced in the air. My body trembled as it freed my arms to grab my face. My hands shot out to press against its chest as my mouth was forced open. I tried to scream, but it was blocked out by the monster's tongue, forcing into my mouth and down my throat. They worked to slide along every crevice, making sure no speck of blood was left unnoticed. I could only thrash beneath it, kicking and clawing at skin that felt like cold metal. My eyes burned with salty tears, and I could feel bile working its way up just to be stopped by the appendages in its way. I started growing limbs. My muscles burned and my mouth tasted like sulfur. I'm sure it had gotten it all, that I had nothing left to give, but it persisted, claws digging into the side of my head as it forced my mouth to open wider. My eyes started to shut. I gave up. Hey. The monster stilled. I felt its tongues slowly retract. Get the hell off my boy. A gun cocked. Bang. My body lurched as the monster was thrown off me. I heard it hit the opposite wall. It gave one last click, then fell silent. My eyes opened to find my father hovering above me with a shotgun in his hands. Charlie, can you hear me, buddy? I groaned, rolling onto my back. Dad, you own a gun? Of course I do. He chuckled and shifted the gun into one hand so the other could reach down. My own hand lifted, fingers barely brushing his before a light clicking came from the side. Our heads turned just in time to see the creature rising on bent legs. Its claws scratched against the mask laying on the floor, one finger hooking against the string on the back to lift it in the air. Red eyes locked onto my father, who was already reloading the shotgun. Do your worst, you son of a bitch. He cocked the gun, aimed, and fired. A short screech left the creature as it knocked back against the wall for a second time. It recovered quickly, though, pulling the mask over its face before rushing at my father, who was trying to get another shot in. I scrambled to my feet as it knocked him down, claws sinking into forearm. He screamed in pain, fist pounding against the side of its face as he cursed at it. I ran for the shotgun. My fingers managed to brush the handle before I was knocked back by a clawed hand, the same hand that came around my throat as I hit the wall, lifting me so my feet dangled. It hissed from behind the mask, pulling me forward before slamming me back against the wall. It pulled for a second time before it screeched as Elowen drove her knife into its shoulder. It threw me as it turned, and my head hit the corner at the hallway. I could hear my name being shouted as everything went black. The sun was barely cresting over the horizon when I finally woke up. My head throbbed as I forced myself onto my feet, eyes scanning the living room. Dad? I forced myself down the hallway, peeking into rooms and switching on lights that made my eyes feel like they were bleeding. Elowen? No response. I made my way back to the living room where the front door was wide open and barely hanging on to the hinges. The porch was covered with scratch marks and streaks of blood. But that's where it ended. No trail, no sign, just two abandoned cars in the driveway. I don't know how I did it, but I managed to drive myself to the hospital before I could pass out a second time. The doctor said I was lucky to have survived such an attack. Most people didn't. I asked if they could contact the police. I needed to put out a watch for my dad and girlfriend. They could still be out there, and that thing needed to be killed. She refused. She just patted me on the shoulder with an unconvincing look of sympathy and told me to move on. I tried to argue, tried to say that they could still be alive, but she brushed me off. She said she'd seen lots of people like me, people that refused to believe it, refused to let those monsters get away with snatching up the ones they loved. After an hour of begging, she finally called the cops, but not from my family. For me. She said they had a program for victims of attacks, a home where we could live with similar folk, recount our stories, and learn to be ones with society again. She even gave me this dumb brochure, but I tore it up when she left. I don't need a brochure or some kind of rehab center. I need my family. So I left. I slipped out when she went to go check on another patient and bolted to the bus station. From what I've heard, the cops completely blocked off my house, which leaves me with nothing but my bloody clothes from last night, and enough bus money to get me across town. I don't know where I'm going to go, but I know that I'm going to look for my family. My dad spent my whole life protecting me from that monster, and if there's even a chance they're still alive, I'm going to do the same. Keep your doors locked, and if you're stupid enough not to, then you better learn how to fight. You'll lose, but at least you won't make it easy. I've been the voice on the air for 6 years, though Weatherman feels like a title I stole. My scripts arrive via an ancient thermal fax machine bolted to the corner of my desk. It has no phone line. The power cord sits coiled on the floor like a dead snake. Yet it screams to life. The paper it spits out is always cold, colder than the room. I don't remember how I even got this job. I don't remember the interview. I don't remember the application. I only remember the phone ringing in the middle of a dream and a voice telling me I started Monday. Now I sit in the booth from sunrise to sunset, reading whatever the machine spits out. Someone has to tell them what's coming. Someone has to give them a chance to run. Most days, the machine, I call it the specialist, just groans. It hums with a low-frequency vibration that makes my teeth ache, eventually spitting out a tongue of thermal paper that reeks of scorched oil and old electricity. On the good days, the messages are boring. Light drizzle, partly cloudy, the kind of news that lets me pretend I'm just a guy with a job. But then there are the other days. The specialist doesn't just hum on those days. It screams. It's a mechanical seizure. The sound of paper, shredder, choking on bone, and the high-pitched wail of a dying cat. When the paper finally slides out, the ink is still wet and oily. The paper feels like skin peeled from someone fresh out of the shower. I remember the first time the forecast changed. It didn't mention the sky at all. Heavy mist for the next 2 hours. If you hear knocking at your door, do not open it. Do not ask who is there. Or, thunderstorms rolling in. If you see a dead relative in a reflection, do not acknowledge them. They are looking for an invitation. I have to read those words into the microphone. I have to keep my voice steady, even when I can feel the specialist watching the back of my head, waiting to see if I'll miss a syllable. Because out there, in the quiet houses and moving cars, people are listening, and I'm the only one telling them how to survive. I'm not entirely alone in the station, though it often feels that way. There's Ricky and Ashley. Ashley handles the local news and community updates. She's giddy. Too giddy. She moves through the dim hallways with a chirpy, caffeinated energy that feels like a serrated blade against the silence of the booth. She brings me coffee, black, bitter, and smelling slightly of the same burnt oil as the fax machine. But she never looks at the specialist. She never asks why my weather reports sound like survival manuals. She just smiles, her teeth a little too white in the fluorescent light, and tells me to keep up the good work. Then there's Rick. Rick is the ghost in the machine. He's the one who keeps the lights from flickering out and the plumbing from backing up into the lobby. He's a man of grease stains and heavy sighs. We don't talk much, which suits me. He just moves from the peripheral of my vision, tightening bolts on things that shouldn't be loose and watching the walls with a wary, exhausted intensity. They fill the gaps between my broadcasts, providing a thin veneer of office life. But sometimes, when the specialist starts its rhythmic, bone-grinding shriek, I catch them both freezing, just for a second. Ashley's smile will falter, and Rick will grip his wrench and his knuckles turn gray. It was a Tuesday, indistinguishable from any other. I stepped into the booth, a cramped box that smelled of static and dust, and gave the specialist a soft pat on its cold beige casing. It was my morning ritual, a way of acknowledging the beast before it woke up. Ashley fluttered in a moment later, clutching 2 foam cups. Her cheerfulness felt loud in the small space, like a radio played at the wrong frequency. "Ready for another fun day?" she asked, her smile pinned perfectly in place. "I guess you could call it that," I replied. The coffee she handed me was scalding, the steam curling into the air like a ghost. "Oh, Thomas," she giggled, backing toward the door. "I know there's a soft spot behind all that stone." I managed a faint roll of my eyes as she vanished back into the hallway, left alone with the hum of the electronics. I turned to the window. It was one part of the job I actually liked. The parking lot was small, a gray patch of asphalt carved out of the dense, encroaching tree line. From here, I could watch the single road that bled into the forest. On mornings like this, with the mist clinging to the tops of the pines, it looked peaceful, but it was a fragile kind of peace. The kind you find in a graveyard before the first shovel hits the dirt. The trees stood so still they didn't look like wood and needles. They looked like a crowd of people standing perfectly silent, waiting for me to turn my back. I settled the headset over my ears, the plastic cool against my temples. In the background, Ashley's voice filtered through the monitors, bubbly, rhythmic, and utterly disconnected from the cold reality of the booth. I tuned her out. I was waiting for the only sound that mattered. Then, it came. The specialist didn't just print, it convulsed. A sharp metallic shriek ripped through the room, the sound of a blade dragging across a chalkboard. A fresh tongue of thermal paper slid out, curling toward the floor. I grabbed it, my heart doing a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. I leaned into the mic, giving it 2 soft taps. Thump thump, like a heartbeat. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice dropping into that smooth practice tone. "Tom is here with the weather. It's going to be a gloomy one today. Expect light drizzling throughout the morning, with cooler temperatures moving in from the north." I read it word for word. I didn't breathe until the sentence was finished. I never dared to ad-lib, never dared to summarize. Even a normal report felt like a contract. If the specialist said drizzle, I said drizzle. If I changed a word, if I called it a shower instead of rain, I had the sickening feeling that the world outside would twist itself to fit my mistake, and I didn't want to be responsible for the sound of that snapping. The hours bled into one another, marked only by the slow crawl of shadows across the parking lot. No further updates shrieked from the specialist. It sat silent, a beige tombstone on my desk, radiating a dull, electric heat. Between her segments, Ashley leaned against my doorframe, chatting about nothing. Local bake sales, a new song on the charts, the trivialities of a world that felt increasingly distant. We kept it light. We had to. Later than usual, Rick shuffled past the booth. He carried a heavy toolbox that clanked with a sound of rusted iron, his eyes fixed on a spot an inch above the floorboards. I didn't ask why he was late. He didn't explain. It was our unspoken contract, signed in the silence of the station. We didn't talk about the boss no one had ever met. We didn't compare notes on the phantom phone calls that had plucked us out of our lives and dropped us behind these desks. There was a comfort in ignorance. If I didn't ask Ashley how she got here, she wouldn't have to ask me why I was reading survival instructions to a city that thought I was just talking about the rain. We were 3 strangers holding our breath in the dark, pretending that if we just did our jobs, if Rick kept the pipes from screaming and I kept the script perfect, the dark wouldn't notice us. "So Thomas, I was wondering if maybe you wanted to go to the farmer's market this Saturday." Ashley's voice was different. The high-pitched, radio-ready giddiness had dipped into something softer, something fragile. She was looking at her shoes, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. It was the first time in years she'd acknowledged a world existing outside the 4 walls of this station. Sure," I replied, the words feeling heavy in my mouth. "Why not?" I told myself it was just the loneliness finally leaking through her armor. She looked up and for a second, her smile wasn't a mask. It was real, bright enough to make the dim booth feel almost warm. "Wonderful," she beamed, a genuine spring in her step as she turned the corner. "I can't wait." I watched her go, actually feeling a phantom twitch of a smile myself. I'd pick her up a coffee tomorrow morning, a real one, from the place down the road, not the burnt sludge we drank here. I let myself imagine the sun on a Saturday morning. Then the specialist screamed. It wasn't the usual screech. It was a prolonged, wet sound, like a saw blade hitting a knot of gristle. The air in the booth suddenly turned frigid, the scent of burnt oil replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of an approaching storm. The machine didn't just print. It shook the entire desk, vomiting out a strip of paper that looked charred around the edges. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know what kind of weather required a sound like that, but someone had to tell them. Someone had to try to save their lives. I reached for the paper, my fingers trembling. The heat coming off it felt like a fever. I smoothed it out on the desk and leaned into the microphone. My voice felt thin, a fragile thread of sound in the sudden, heavy silence of the station. "Attention, listeners." I began, my eyes scanning the jagged text. "Update for the overnight hours. We're looking at a sudden temperature inversion. A thick, localized fog will begin rolling in from the tree line starting at 10 p.m. Expect near zero visibility." I paused. The next line wasn't about barometric pressure or wind shear. It was printed in a larger, shakier font. "The fog will carry the sound of a child crying for help. Do not go outside. Do not shine a light into the mist to find them. If the crying starts to sound like your own voice, cover your ears and stay away from the windows until sunrise." I sat there, the on-air light bleeding red across my knuckles. I thought of Ashley, her pep, and her Saturday plans. I thought of the road leading out of the parking lot, currently being swallowed by a gray, unnatural tide. The specialist gave one final wet click, a sound like a tongue snapping against the roof of a mouth, and went cold. 6 o'clock arrived with the heavy, mechanical thud of the station's clock. I caught Ashley and Rick by the heavy steel exit door. "The fog," I said, my voice sounding raspy even to my own ears. "Remember the report. Stay inside. Don't look for the source of the noise." They both nodded. Ashley's smile was gone, replaced by a tight, thin line of apprehension. Rick didn't even look at me. He just adjusted the strap of his heavy toolbox and pushed out into the evening. For the first time in 6 years, the unspoken contract felt like it was fraying at the edges. I cared if they made it home. I cared if I saw them tomorrow. When I stepped out, the air didn't hit me. It swallowed me. The fog wasn't a mist. It was a physical weight, tasting of wet ash and static. It clung to my skin, instantly soaking through my coat. The specialist's accuracy was a jagged blade, perfect and cold. I could barely see the hood of my car 10 feet away. Through the shifting gray curtains, I saw Rick. He was standing by the open door of the rusted truck, but he wasn't getting in. He was staring back at the radio station, his silhouette stunted and lonely in the haze. He looked smaller than usual, his shoulders slumped under a grief I couldn't name. I raised a hand to call out to him, to ask if he was okay, but the words died in my throat. The fog between us seemed to thicken, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic light that didn't come from any street lamp. Before I could find my voice, Rick climbed into the cab. The door shut with a hollow, final sound, and his taillights bled into the mist like two fading embers before vanishing entirely. I stood there in the silence, my hand still half raised, listening, and then, from somewhere deep in the tree line, I heard it, the first faint, thin wail of a child. I ignored the sounds in the fog. It's a skill I've perfected over 6 years, the ability to lock my empathy in a box and keep walking. By the time I reached my front door, the world was silent again. The specialist's rules only seem to apply when you're standing on its ground. The next morning the world looked scrubbed clean. The fog had vanished as if it had never been, leaving the trees sharp and vivid against a pale sky. I left early, the engine of my car humming a cheerful tone as I pulled into the drive-thru of a local cafe. I bought 2 coffees, a plain black for myself and something lighter, sweeter for Ashley. The warmth of the cups against my palm felt like a promise. I was actually looking forward to the station. I wanted to see her face when she saw the drink. I wanted to believe that people had listened to my voice last night, that they had stayed inside, covered their ears, and ignored the phantom cries in the mist. The coffee cups sat in the passenger seat, the sweet scent of Ashley's vanilla latte filling the car. I pulled into the station lot, my mind on the Saturday market, on the sun, on anything but the radio. Then the tires hit something soft, a wet, heavy thwack that didn't sound like a pothole. I slammed on the brakes. My stomach turned a cold somersault as I looked through the windshield. The parking lot wasn't gray anymore. It was a mosaic of raw, glistening meat and tangled limbs. They weren't just dead. They had been unmade. A dozen figures lay scattered across the asphalt, but the geometry was all wrong. I saw a man whose torso had been elongated and coiled like a length of garden hose. His ribs snapped outward to form a jagged ivory cage. Next to him, a woman had been fused to the trunk of a pine tree. Her skin stretched so thin it was translucent, revealing the frantic, pulsing machinery of organs that shouldn't have still been working. But it was the faces that made me scream behind my teeth. Their mouths were pulled open in impossible, yawning vertical ovals. The skin of their cheeks ripped back to the jawbone. Their eyes weren't just wide. The lids had been removed, leaving bulging, bloodshot spheres that stared at nothing. They looked exactly like the hollow-eyed agony of the scream, but rendered in shivering, wet muscle and bruised fat. The worst part was the sound. It wasn't the wind. It was a low, bubbling whistle coming from those cavernous mouths, the sound of air escaping through ruined windpipes. They were still breathing. The fog hadn't finished the job. It had just changed their shape. In the center of the carnage, I saw a familiar blue jacket. Rick. His body had been flattened down as if all his bones were removed. His neck was stretched out like taffy wrapped around his rusty toolbox. I walked through the asphalt, and the ground felt spongy. I tried not to look down, but the squelch beneath my boots forced my eyes to the pavement. I hadn't stepped on a stone. I had stepped on a tongue, a long gray ribbon of muscle that trailed out from a pile of what used to be a local delivery driver. It was still twitching, tasting the air, even though the rest of the man was a flattened husk of shattered bone and burst intestines. I walked toward the entrance, my breath coming in shallow, jagged hitches. To my left, 2 figures had been woven together. Their limbs had been braided like dough. The skin fused so seamlessly that I couldn't tell where one person ended and the other began. They looked like a human knot, a sculpture of purple bruising and exposed sinew. One of them turned a head that was mostly just a gaping, toothless smile, and a thick, yellow fluid leaked from its ear as it tried to moan. It sounded like air escaping a punctured tire. I passed the bike rack, where a teenager was draped like a wet towel. His spine had been removed. God knows how, and his limp body was knotted through the metal bars. His eyes, fixed and glassy, followed me. He was nothing but a bag of fluid and meat now. Yet his fingers continued to drum a rhythmic, mindless beat against the metal. Tap, tap, tap. I reached the heavy steel doors of the station. My hand hovered over the handle, which was coated in a thin, translucent film of mucus. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I wiped my hands on my pants, gripped the slime-slicked handle, and pulled. Ashley was hunched over her desk, a small trembling heap of floral print fabric and terror. Her breathing was a series of wet, hitching gasps, and her eyes were fixed on these security monitors, the small, grainy screens that showed the mosaic I had just walked through. I called the police already," she stammered, her voice a fragile whistle. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. "I am so scared, Thomas. The bodies. Oh God, the bodies in the light. They're still moving." I just set the sweet, vanilla-scented coffee on the corner of her desk. The steam rose in a gentle plume, smelling of a world that no longer existed. I leaned down and gave her a kind, practiced smile. The sort of smile a mortuary director gives to the grieving. I gave her a small, stiff nod of encouragement. "Drink up, Ashley," I said softly. "It's going to be a long day." She looked at the cup as if I'd handed her a severed head. I didn't stay to see if she drank it. I had a schedule to keep. I turned and walked to my booth, my boots leaving faint, reddish-brown smears on the linoleum. The specialist was vibrating so violently now that the pens on my desk were dancing. The shriek it was emitting had shifted into something rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The moment the booth door clicked shut, the world went silent. The violent tremors of the desk ceased, and the specialist sat bathed in the soft, clinical glow of my desk lamp. It looked almost innocent. Then it fed me the morning's work. First came a strip of standard thermal paper, white and sterile. I looked at it. Sunny, high of 78, a perfect, golden day for the town. I looked out the window and my breath hitched. The parking lot was empty. The mosaic of meat, the braided limbs, the yawning faces, all gone. Even the blood had been licked clean from the asphalt. The sun was shining with a cruel, blinding brightness that made the morning slaughter feel like a fever dream. Then the machine stuttered one last time and pushed out the second sheet. It didn't slide out. It slumped. It was a square of pale, cured leather, still warm and slightly damp. The edges were jagged, showing the faint, rhythmic marks of a serrated blade. There were no ink ribbons here. The words had been raised in welts, like a rash forming under the surface of the skin. "Do not let the weather in, Thomas." I didn't scream. I couldn't afford to. I set the skin face down on the desk, unable to look at the texture of it any longer. I reached for my headset, the plastic feeling alien and cold against my skin. My hands were steady. Too steady. I leaned toward the microphone. The on-air light bled a deep, arterial red across my knuckles. I tapped the mesh. Thump, thump. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice as bright and hollow as the sun outside. "Tom is here. And now, for the weather." I hadn't been back to my grandmother's house since I was a teenager. I didn't realize how long it had been until my mom mentioned it over the phone. Back then, she still made me go with her. Long drives and long nights in a house that always felt like it was swallowed by the swamp. Somewhere along the way, the visits just stopped. Life got in the way. My mom called me on a Tuesday evening. "She's still living out there by herself," she said. "And she isn't doing like she used to." Grandma had been widowed for 10 years. Grandpa passed quietly in his sleep, and she never left that house after. Neighbors came by to check on her, bring groceries, help with chores, but she wouldn't move. "The land won't let me," she told my mom once, and I never really understood what she meant. "She's been asking about you," my mom said. "You should go see her." So I did. The drive from New Orleans took longer than I remembered. Street lights got fewer and fewer until they disappeared. The paved roads turned into dirt roads that got narrower the farther I went. The swamp felt like it was pressing close on both sides. Spanish moss hung from the trees, heavy and still. Water puddled in the low spots. The smell of mud and wet plants stuck to the air and my clothes. I had to park my car about half a mile from her house. The road past that point had turned into mud so soft it would have swallowed my car. I grabbed my bag and started walking. My shoes sank a little with each step, and the wet smell of the swamp stayed in my nose. Her house was at the edge of the water, lifted on cinder blocks so it looked like it was floating above the swamp. A narrow wooden dock stretched out from the porch into the dark water. I could hear it creak under the wind. The house itself looked smaller than I remembered, like it had been settling into the swamp for decades. She opened the door herself. She was thinner than I remembered and bent in ways that made me worry, but her eyes were still sharp. She leaned on the door frame and reached for me. She stood long enough to hug me, her hands gripping my shirt like she needed to make sure I was real. "Lord, child, you done let the years slip by," she said, her tone in that classic grandma nag. "I didn't forget," I told her. She laughed softly. That's what they all say." Inside, the house smelled like old wood and dried herbs, with something sharp underneath it all. The curtains were drawn even though it was still daylight. I noticed little things without really thinking about them. White lines near the door frame, a small cloth bundle pinned high on the wall where only the eyes could reach it. I didn't ask about them. Something told me not to. That night, after the neighbors had gone and the swamp swallowed the sun, the sounds came alive. Frogs called across the water, insects buzzed thick in the air. Somewhere deep in the distance an alligator bellowed, long and low, the sound rolling through the ground like it was alive under my feet. Grandma sat in her chair, listening. "They stirred up tonight," she said. "It's just noise," I said. "Same as always." She looked at me for a long moment. "Baby," she said, "you ain't been here long enough to know what always sound like." I laughed lightly. I thought she was just teasing me like she used to. I'm not laughing about it now. That night I couldn't sleep. The heat from the day hadn't left, and the air was thick with cicadas, screaming so loud it felt like it was shaking the walls. Somewhere in the swamp, water splashed against something. Maybe a branch, maybe a fish. I kept turning over in bed, listening, but the sounds only made it worse. I got up to grab a glass of water, hoping it would settle me. The hallway was dark, the floorboards creaking under my weight. I stepped out onto the porch, the night thick around me. The deck smelled like wet wood and moss, the swamp smelling sharper than it had during the day. I leaned against the railing and tried to breathe. That's when I saw it, a little glint of light, far out in the water reflecting the moon. I squinted. It was down there at the bottom, just barely visible through the dark water. I leaned closer, curiosity winning over caution. It looked like some kind of pendant, maybe old and made of brass or silver, tangled in weeds. I reached for it, and then I froze. A low bellow rolled out from the water, deep and menacing. My heart jumped. I whipped my head toward the sound. From the far edge of the swamp, something massive moved through the dark water. A bull gator, thick and huge, pushed itself into the shallow part near the deck. Its head broke the surface. Glinting eyes catching the moonlight, the water rippled as it moved, slow and deliberate, like it knew I was there. I tried to step back, planning to get away from the edge, but one of the deck planks groaned and gave out under me. I fell through. Water hit me fast and cold. I was never a good swimmer. I kept thinking about that gator, just below me somewhere, waiting. Somehow I was able to grab the deck and pull myself up. I looked down at the hole where the plank had broken. The bull gator slid past slowly, scales glinting under the moon, just where I had fallen. My hands shook and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I went back inside, dripping and shivering. Grandma was in the kitchen calling out my name. "You alright, baby?" she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp when she saw me. Yeah, I'm fine," I said, dripping water onto the floor. She shook her head, a little smile on her lips. "Those planks are going to give out someday anyway. It's all right. Go get yourself changed." I did as she said, but I didn't sleep much after that. Every sound from the swamp kept me awake. The cicadas, the water, something moving just beyond sight. I kept thinking about that pendant at the bottom and the bull gator, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had only just begun to notice how alive the swamp really was. The next morning, Grandma sent me into town. She gave me a short list written in shaky handwriting: milk, bread, her blood pressure medicine, and the kind of coffee she liked, even though the doctor told her not to drink it anymore. The town was small, just a single grocery store, a gas station, and a few buildings that looked like they had been there longer than anyone alive. The drive was quiet. Trees crowded the road on both sides, and the swamp followed me most of the way, water flashing between trunks. I felt better being away from the house, like I could finally breathe again. The city had taught me to trust noise. Silence always made me uneasy. The grocery store was cool inside, the air smelling like old fruit and cleaner. There were only a few people shopping, all of them quiet, moving slow. I grabbed what was on Grandma's list and headed to the counter. That's when I noticed the clerk's necklace. It was small, hanging on a thin chain, but I knew it right away. The shape was the same as the pendant I had seen in the swamp. Same curves, same strange markings carved into it. My stomach dropped. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "That necklace, where'd you get it?" The clerk stopped moving. He didn't look up at first. Then his eyes lifted and locked onto mine. They were flat, empty, like he was looking through me instead of at me. For a second I thought maybe he hadn't heard me. I opened my mouth to repeat myself, but before I could, he rang up my items and said my total. His voice was normal, calm, like nothing had happened. I paid and took my bags, my hands sweating. As I turned to leave, I felt it. That crawling feeling on the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I glanced back over my shoulder. The clerk was still staring at me. I pushed the door open and stepped outside, the heat hitting me hard. Even then, I didn't feel alone. I walked to my car with that same feeling following me. That night is when things really started to feel wrong. The sun went down, bleeding through the trees before the swamp swallowed it whole. Grandma went to bed early. She always did. I could hear her radio murmuring through the thin walls, gospel low enough to feel more like a hum than music. Outside, the cicadas had been loud all evening, screaming like they were trying to tear the night open. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling on my phone, trying to ignore how tight my chest felt. Then, all at once, the noise stopped. Not faded, not slowed down, just gone. I froze. I grew up in Louisiana. I knew the swamp never went quiet unless something was very wrong. Even the city had its sounds at night. Sirens, cars, people. Silence like that felt heavy, like pressure on my ears. I got up and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. My hands were shaking and I told myself it was just nerves. Long day. Not enough sleep. That's what city life teaches you to say when things don't make sense. I stepped out onto the deck for air. The moon was high, shining down on the water. The swamp looked flat and still, like black glass. No frogs, no insects, nothing moving. That's when I heard the whispering. It wasn't loud. It sounded like voices carried underwater, soft and layered, like a crowd speaking all at once but too far away to understand. My skin prickled. I turned around. They were standing at the edge of the yard, where the grass gave way to mud. At least 5 of them, maybe more. They wore old clothes, the kind you see in history books. Long coats, dresses hanging loose and heavy with wet. Everything about them was dark and soaked, like they had climbed straight out of the swamp. Their heads weren't human. Each one wore the rotted head of a gator, skin peeling, teeth showing through torn flesh. Mud dripped from their jaws. Around their necks, every single one of them wore the same pendant I had seen in the water, the same one the clerk had worn. It caught the moonlight and gleamed. They didn't move. They didn't speak. Then, all at once, they raised their arms and pointed at me. That's the last thing I remember. I woke up in my bed like nothing had happened. Morning light was coming through the thin curtains, pale and gray. For a second, I thought maybe I was back home in the city. Then I heard the swamp, water shifting, a bird calling far off. The house creaking the way it always did. My clothes were dry, my body felt sore like I had slept wrong, but there was no mud, no water, no sign I had ever been outside. Grandma was already up. I could hear her in the kitchen moving slow, dishes clinking together. When I came out, she was standing at the sink, leaning heavy on the counter. "You up now?" she said without turning around. "Good. These joints ain't what they used to be." I took her place and started washing. The water was cold. Everything was too normal. I kept replaying the night in my head, every detail sharp like it had just happened. "I had a dream," I said finally. She hummed like she already knew. "A bad one," I added. "Real bad. Felt real." She didn't answer right away. I scrubbed a plate harder than I needed to. I told her about the silence, about the people. I didn't say gator heads at first, but the words came out anyway. I told her how they pointed at me, how I woke up shaking. She set a dish towel down slow and looked at me. Her eyes were cloudy with age, but sharp underneath. "Dreams don't always mean something," she said. I laughed a little, trying to shake it off. "I know, just saying it felt different, like it wasn't just in my head." She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, something splashed in the water. "Spirits got a way of speaking when they want to," she said softly. "They don't always use words." I looked at her then. "You saying that wasn't a dream?" She shook her head just a little. "I'm saying some things don't come for you until you step back where you belong to." I waited for her to say more, but she didn't. She picked up her coffee and rolled herself toward the table, leaving the rest hanging in the air. I stood there with my hands in the sink, watching the water, wishing she'd just say it plain, but Grandma never did things that way, and somehow, that scared me more than if she had. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was standing just outside the house, waiting. Grandma's radio was off, which made it worse. I laid there listening to the water lap against the dock and the house creak, telling myself I was being stupid. Sometime after midnight I got up. I didn't have a plan. I just knew Grandma knew more than she was saying. The way she talked that morning, the way she cut herself off, it sat in my chest like a stone. Her room was dark. The door cracked open. I could hear her breathing, slow and steady. I stayed quiet and went into the small sitting room instead. She kept most of her things there. Old drawers, stacked boxes, nothing locked. I started with the dresser. Old letters folded so many times the paper was soft. Church programs, receipts. Normal stuff. Then I found the photo album. It was heavy, thick leather cover, worn smooth from hands. When I opened it, the first pages were what I expected. Black and white photos of family members smiling stiffly at the camera. Sunday clothes, front porches, names written in faded ink underneath. I turned the page. The clothes changed. Older now, dresses longer, men in suspenders. The dates written in the margins said early 1900s. My last name was still there. Same blood, same family. That's when I saw it. The pendant. One woman wore it around her neck, clear as day. On the next page, a man had it tucked into his shirt. Then another, and another. Every few pages, the same symbol showed up again, always close to the skin. My hands were shaking by the time I reached the back of the album. Tucked into the last pages were newspaper clippings. Yellowed, brittle, headlines about men found dead, names matching the ones in the photos. I didn't read too close. I didn't need to. I knew what they were talking about. My stomach turned. "What are you doing in my things?" I nearly dropped the album. Grandma was sitting up in bed, her robe hanging loose, her eyes sharp despite the hour. "You know something," I said, my voice coming out rough. "You've known something this whole time." She looked at the album in my hands, then back at my face, her mouth pressed into a thin line. "Put that down," she said. "No," I said, "not this time. You need to tell me what this is. What's been happening to me?" The room felt smaller then, like the walls were leaning in. Grandma stared at me for a long moment, fear flickering across her face before she hid it. Somewhere outside, the swamp shifted, slow and heavy. Grandma sat down hard in her chair like the truth weighed more than her bones. She didn't look at me at first. She just stared at the floor, hands folded tight in her lap. "This was a long time ago," she said, "back when the law didn't see us as nothing worth protecting." I didn't interrupt her. She continued. "Our family lost 3 men and a little boy," she went on, "taken right out the parish. Just hanging like warnings." Her voice stayed steady, but her fingers shook. "It broke us. Folks were scared to leave the house, scared to speak too loud, scared to breathe wrong." She swallowed. "One of the women back then, my grandmother, she couldn't live like that no more. So she went into the swamp, went where nobody else would. She prayed, but not to God alone. She asked anything that would listen to keep our blood safe." My mouth felt dry. "And something answered," Grandma said. She finally looked at me then. "It promised protection, said no more ropes, no more mobs, no more men taken before their time. But nothing comes free. That spirit wanted its due." I asked it before I could stop myself. "What kind of due?" I said, still confused. 100 years, she said. "That's how long it would guard us. After that, the bargain was done. Whatever hunger it had would be loose again." The room felt cold. I thought about the dates in the album, about the way the figures had pointed at me. "The people I saw," I said quietly. "That was them?" She nodded. "Your ancestors. They stayed close to the water after death, watching, waiting, trying to warn you." My chest tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted to see you," she said. "Wanted to have you here, safe, before the time was up. I didn't know it would come so soon." Her voice cracked just a little. I thought maybe the spirit would pass us by. Maybe it already took enough. Outside, something moved in the swamp, slow and heavy. Grandma reached for my hand, her grip weak but urgent. "You need to understand," she said. "The protection is gone now, and it knows your name." Grandma squeezed my hand hard, harder than I thought she could. "You need to go," she said, "right now." "What?" I said. "No, I'm not leaving you here." Her eyes flashed at me. "That thing is awake," she snapped, "and it's hungry. My time's already done. I lived long. You ain't." I went to her chair, tried to push it back. "I can get you in the car. We can—" She interrupted me. "Boy," she yelled, loud enough to make me flinch, "get the hell out of my house." I froze. I had never heard her raise her voice like that. Not once in my life. "It wants the blood still walking," she said, breath shaking now. "Not the ones already half gone. If you stay, it'll take you. If you don't, maybe it won't follow far." The house creaked. Something heavy shifted outside, close enough that I felt it more than heard it. "Go," she said again, softer this time. "Run." I grabbed my keys and didn't even think about shoes. I burst out onto the deck in my pajamas. The boards slick under my feet. The swamp was loud again, too loud, like it was breathing all around me. I ran. I'm not a runner. Never have been. My lungs burned, my legs shook, but I didn't stop. I made it to my car, hands slipping as I yanked the door open. It started on the first try. I didn't look back. I drove too fast down the narrow road, trees whipping past. Then something jumped out in front of me. A deer. Big. Close. I swerved. The car slammed into a tree so hard my head rang. The engine is dead and smoking now. I've locked the doors. My hands are shaking like crazy. Now I'm sitting here and typing this while I still can. I don't know exactly where I am. Somewhere outside New Orleans. Deep in the bayou. My battery is low. I've got barely any service. I can hear it out there. A deep bellow rolling through the water. It's getting closer. I worked for the county, not as a dispatcher, but as one of those people who cleaned up recordings afterward. Training material, legal review, that kind of thing. Most calls never made it past the first pass. They were boring or redundant or too chaotic to be useful. Others stayed with me longer than they should have. You learn to compartmentalize. You have to. This one slipped through. The call came in at 2:17 a.m. on a Wednesday. Residential. No address anomaly. No dropped signal. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, exactly how it should be. The caller was a woman, mid-30s, maybe older. Hard to tell. Her voice was steady in a way that didn't match what she was saying. "There's someone in my house," she said. The dispatcher followed protocol, asked for her address, confirmed it, asked if she was in immediate danger. "I don't think so," the woman said. "He's just standing there." "Standing where?" "In the hallway, outside my bedroom." The dispatcher asked if she could leave the room. "No." "Why not?" "Because he told me not to." There it was, the first thing that made me pause the audio. The dispatcher handled it well, asked for a description, male, average height, dark clothes, no visible weapon, not moving, just standing. Police were dispatched, ETA was 7 minutes. The dispatcher told the woman to stay on the line, lock the door if possible. "I already did," the woman said. "He unlocked it." That earned a note in the margin. Possible hallucination. Possible domestic situation. Stress response. The dispatcher asked if the woman knew the man. "I don't think so," she said. Then after a beat, "He knows me." "How?" "He's using my name." The dispatcher asked her to whisper if she needed to. The woman said, "He says it doesn't matter." That was when the call quality changed. Not static, not interference. Just a subtle flattening of the sound, like the room had absorbed it. I remember leaning back in my chair when I first heard that part, rolling my shoulders, telling myself not to anthropomorphize audio. The dispatcher asked the woman to describe what the man was doing now. "He tilted his head," she said, "like he's listening to you." The dispatcher paused. You could hear it, half a second too long. "Ma'am, is he speaking right now?" "No," the woman said. but he's smiling. The dispatcher told her to keep her eyes on the door. I don't have to, the woman said. I can see his shadow under it. The dispatcher asked if there was any light on in the hallway. No. Then how could she see the shadow? Another pause. He's brighter than the dark, the woman said. That was where the training value dropped off. That line got the call flagged for psychological distress. I should have trimmed it there. I didn't. The dispatcher redirected, asked the woman to describe her surroundings, grounding techniques, breathe, name objects in the room. The woman complied. Bed, dresser, lamp, phone. Then she stopped. What is it? The dispatcher asked. He's closer, the woman said. I didn't hear him move. The dispatcher told her officers were en route. I know, the woman said. He said they won't see him. The dispatcher asked her to clarify. He said he's not here the way they're here. The sentence is underlined 3 times in my notes. The dispatcher asked the woman to keep talking. I don't think I'm supposed to, she said. He's asking why you were lying to me. The dispatcher assured her no one was lying. The woman laughed, a short sound, almost embarrassed. He says you're very good at it, she said. At 2:23 a.m., the audio picked up a second voice. It was faint, not coming through the phone, coming through the room. I replayed that section dozens of times, checked waveforms, compared channels. It was there, a man's voice, low and unhurried. That's not true, it said. The dispatcher reacted immediately, asked who else was in the room. The woman didn't answer. Instead, the man spoke again, clearer this time. You shouldn't have told her to lock the door. The dispatcher called for backup. Her voice stayed level, but it tightened. Ma'am, if you can hear me, please respond. She can hear you, the man said. She just doesn't know which of us to answer. The woman started crying then, quietly, like she was trying not to be rude. I don't want to make him mad, she said. The dispatcher asked who he was. I asked her not to explain me, the man said. It never goes well. The dispatcher told the woman to leave the phone on and exit through the window if possible. There was a sound then, fabric shifting, footsteps, not hurried. No, the man said, not raised, not threatening, just firm. We're almost done. The dispatcher said officers were on the street. I know, the man said. I can hear them thinking. The woman made a small noise, like surprise. He's right, she said. They're scared. The dispatcher asked the woman to focus on her voice. Which one? The woman asked. That was the last thing she said. The call ended at 2:26 a.m. Abrupt disconnect. No struggle sounds, no scream, just silence. The police report came in later that morning. Officers arrived to find the house empty, front door unlocked, bedroom undisturbed, phone on the bed, screen cracked from the inside. No signs of forced entry, no signs of exit. The woman had no history of mental illness, no domestic partner, no neighbors reported seeing anyone leave. The case was marked unresolved. I edited the call down to 6 minutes, removed the second voice, cut the stranger references, left it as a textbook example of a perceived intruder with dissociative features. That is what I told myself. 2 months later, I got a call from my supervisor, asked if I had worked on file 17-0426. I said yes. She asked why my name was spoken on the recording. I didn't understand. She played it for me, a version I had never heard. Same call, same timestamps, same voices. Except this time, when the man spoke for the first time, he said my name. Not shouted, not emphasized, like it was obvious. "That's not true, Esha," he said. I told my supervisor it must have been contamination, audio bleed, suggestibility. She nodded. She looked tired. She asked me to listen to one more thing. A new call taken that morning. Different dispatcher, different address. A man on the line this time. "There's someone in my house," he said. The dispatcher asked for his name. He gave it. Then he said, "He's telling me you already know this part." The attic had been leaking for a few days now, and I had been up to my wits' end about it. Elizabeth told me to call a contractor, but I knew I was perfectly capable of fixing it. We had been warned the house would be a fixer-upper, but with a baby on the way and our budgets being tight, I told her that I was up to the task of converting this small country house into our cozy nest that we had always dreamed of. She was mostly on board to get out of the city, and I needed a project to work on at the time. We have been living here for about 2 years now, and suddenly the attic decided to leak. I had fixed most of the electrical and plumbing in the house already, so I assumed that either a critter had gotten up there and the recent rain had come through, or I hadn't tightened a pipe or sealed it properly. I grabbed my ladder and my toolbox and went up the rickety wooden stairs into the attic. By all accounts, the attic itself made no sense. The house was a small 2-bedroom house with 1 bathroom, a decent-sized living room, and a small kitchen, as if built to fit into an apartment. The house wasn't 2 stories tall. It just had an attic that you could squat in. Why someone who lived in a house this size would need an attic? I have no clue, but I have to admit that it was nice to have. As I used my flashlight around the stuffy attic, I saw the boxes of holiday decor and baby toys we had been given for Jameson, so that he would have some when he got older. Grandparents, am I right? But then I saw something shift behind a wooden horse. I dragged myself up into the attic, and I moved myself about as I came closer to the spot. I felt it first, before the smell hit my nostrils. Wet, puffy, wrinkled, the smell of dead things. Things that had been sitting in here for a long time. I swung the flashlight to what my other hand had touched, and that is when I realized what it was. The eyes had burst from when I shifted my weight onto the hand. The skull flattened and the neck had an impression of my pinky finger on it. I couldn't immediately identify it, but from what I could tell, it must have been a really decayed raccoon or cat. What made it even more difficult was the lack of fur or any other identifying features. It seemed to have 4 legs, but the paws were a little longer, and it had tiny fingers that resembled human hands. The tail seemed malformed, as it looked like it had grown with a bend in it, like an elbow. The end of the tail had some form of claw on the end, but it could have been a malformed bone. The head was mush, so I'm assuming it was a raccoon. Of course, at the time, I was more concerned about vomiting on my favorite work shirt. I quickly crawled out of the attic and ran into the bathroom to wash off the greasy guts on my left hand and change shirts. I then grabbed a few plastic bags and some gloves from the kitchen before trekking back up there to clean it out. After a few trips and burning through cleaning supplies, I had removed the dead critter and any fluids up there. My focus was off, as my hands had broken out into hives and sores. Elizabeth told me I should go see the doctor, but I told her, I'll wait a day or 2 first. As I scrubbed the hives on my hand, I stared at the creature's hands and tail, how they were twisted with claws as if human. I didn't tell her about how misshapen the creature was, as the problems of the attic were mine. I assumed the critter had somehow crawled up the tree in our backyard and found a hole beneath the roof or behind a gutter, but there was no hole to be found. I emptied the attic and searched every nook and cranny. The leak was definitely coming from where the critter's body had lain, but the attic refused to reveal its exit. It was almost as if the creature had been a plug, but there would still have to be a hole, right? Elizabeth asked me if the leaking could have been the critter pissing on the attic floor, but I told her that the attic only leaked when it had rained, and we would have smelled it. The next day, I had a hard time getting up and continuing the search for the leaking gap. I hadn't slept well, in all honesty, because I had a really weird dream about something outside the bedroom window calling out a name. It doesn't matter, though. Dreams are weird, right? But I do have the name stuck in my head now. I ended up muttering it to myself all day, and I didn't even realize it until Elizabeth asked me what I was saying. I wasn't sure myself, and I hadn't even realized that I was staring out the window while I was muttering. 2 nights ago, things started to change. I had gotten up late that night, waking up from a nightmare, if you must know, and I decided to refill my cup of water. I tiptoed out of the bedroom so as to not wake Elizabeth and went into the kitchen. As I flipped on the light, I almost jumped when I saw a silhouette from the kitchen window. I had just woken up from a dream about something coming in from the window, so you can understand why I was jumpy. I then rubbed my eyes and saw that it was an ooze, leaking from the kitchen ceiling and down the window panel. Thunder roared and lightning flashed outside, highlighting the translucent fluid. It couldn't have been there for more than a few minutes, as the crack in the ceiling looked as if it had only just started taking water damage. I took my empty cup and scooped some of it off the window before it reached the sink, then placed it on the counter. I then spent the next 10 minutes digging around for a bucket and a towel as quietly as I could, and cleaned up as much as possible. Being quite tired from horrible dreams, I absentmindedly grabbed my cup and brought it back to bed with me, thinking I had filled it with water. As the fluid touched my tongue, I realized my mistake, but it was too late. It filled my mouth and ran down my throat as I tried to spit it out. As I gagged and coughed, Elizabeth woke up and asked what was wrong. I told her what happened and she handed me her water. I ended up going to the bathroom and washing my mouth out for a while before finally falling asleep, exhausted. I awoke to a sore throat and a grumpy wife. She said that I had been muttering in my sleep all night, something about somebody arriving. I didn't have a clue what she could have been talking about, so I apologized. After coming home from work, I used my ladder to seal up the cracking ceiling in the kitchen, then went back into the attic. It felt smaller than before, but a lack of sleep was affecting my senses for most of the day. A coworker had poured some water on my lap to wake me up, as I had fallen asleep muttering, so the dimensions of the attic feeling off didn't concern me. What did concern me was that I couldn't find the source of the ooze. The only thing that stuck out was an outline of where the critter had been found, had stained the wood flooring, but that was something I couldn't scrub out. The wife told me I should call pest control or a professional, but I quickly snapped back that I was perfectly capable of fixing anything wrong in the attic, and that I was the only one who could prepare it. I must have said it more aggressively than I intended, because she said that she was going to take our son with her to her mother's house, and that I had been acting strange for the past few days. She claimed that I had been sleepwalking, muttering the same name over and over while opening windows at night, and had become distant. I told her it was just nightmares and that I was fine. I was just stressed because I had a job to do, and if she couldn't understand that, then she should just leave. I haven't seen her for 2 days now, or our son Jameson, I think. Not that it matters now. She wouldn't understand even if I tried to explain it to her. I love her, but I had to fix the leak. I haven't left the house since. My boss called, but I told him I had more important things to do than filling out paperwork, then hung up. But I finally found the leak. That attic thought it could hide it from me, but I found it. At this point, my skin is puffy and red, with dried blood from sores and cracked skin across my arms. I haven't been able to speak. My jaw feels so swollen. Moving or breathing hurts, so I have spent the past few hours sitting in the attic alone. The ooze wasn't just a leak, but rather a gift. He had tried to tell me before, but I didn't understand. As his arms crawl within me, I feel brimming with joy. I finally fixed the leak as I drank what was left of the divine essence. He now dwells within me, reaching out from my throat and peeling away my skin. He has arrived, and we are born again in one form, as I am torn apart from the inside. A cocoon for my Lord of Shagai. It's been 2 weeks since my van got totaled. I'm not gonna lie, that set me back. I'd been sleeping in the rear compartment. Don't feel sorry for me. I'm the idiot who crashed it. After the accident, I had nowhere to sleep. Motel rates were double what I could afford, so I bought a cheap tent from BFC and hitched back to the lot where I used to park. I ended up in a flat section of woods by the Tukey River, past the McDonald's on Ambridge Street. It felt private without being secluded. There were public restrooms a short walk away, a 24-hour 7-Eleven, and just enough light from the nearby car park to make me feel like I wasn't completely alone. 2 days in, dead in the middle of the night, I heard a shrill scream, like a hunter gutting a deer, only to find that it survived the initial buckshot. I wound up my hand-charged flashlight and exited the tent, aiming it from bushes to branches, and to the endless black that swallowed the gaps between the trees. The woods stayed silent after that. Even the buzz of mosquitoes disappeared, but I stayed awake in my tent for an hour or so, straining my ears to hear what sounded like leaves crackling underfoot. The next morning, as I was washing my work shirts in the Tukey River, a pink and gray sneaker washed ashore, caught in the reeds that lined the bank. I retrieved it and read the tag on the inside of the tongue. Woman's size 9. Lots of things washed up in the river. Shoes, clothes, cardboard boxes, and cartons of milk. I tossed the shoe back thinking it was another piece of junk. Later that night I was eating a Big Mac from the Ambridge Street McDonald's, hugging my knees to my chest and trying to keep warm. Outside the leaves began crunching again. I thought maybe a deer had smelt my food or noticed my camping light and came to investigate. I unzipped my tent and went walking into the woods following the sound. Whatever made the sound wasn't disturbed by my movement and kept creeping from tree to tree. My torch light started to stutter, and I stopped to wind the lever and boost the charge. The light turned back on. Ahead of me, something ducked behind a tree. I froze, aiming the flashlight where I'd seen the face. An animal would have scurried away, dashed off into the thickets to escape the human presence. The light started flicking again. I tilted it down to wind the lever. Footsteps, disguising themselves amongst the click, click, click of the wind-up torch. I turned on my feet, sliding on the loose leaves, the torch tumbling from my grip, and I zigzagged between trees and rocks, sprinting back to the tent. I zipped myself inside and waited. I had no tools, no bear spray, no torch, nothing to defend myself with. I switched off the camping light and sat in the darkness, letting my ears work to their full breath. The night went silent again, as still as the surface of water. No bugs, not even the crunch of leaves. Nothing, except for one sound. Wind blowing gently against my tent. Breathing. When I got home tonight, something was off. Not wrong exactly, just off. You know how sometimes you can walk into a room you've been in 1,000 times before and suddenly everything feels slightly tilted, like reality's holding its breath? That's what it was like. The air was too still. The light seemed a bit duller, even though the bulbs were the same. I live alone, 1-bedroom apartment, 2nd floor. Nothing fancy. I jiggled the key, stepped inside, and immediately froze. It smelled different. My place normally smells faintly of coffee and dust, and the citrus cleaner I use on weekends. Tonight it smelled faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I'd forgotten to take the trash out, but when I closed the door, the sound was wrong. The latch clicked, but it sounded deeper, heavier, like the door was thicker than before. I remember thinking, this isn't my door. That's when I noticed the clock on the wall. It was the same model, cheap black plastic, but the hands were moving backwards. I laughed, actually laughed out loud, because that made no sense. I thought maybe I was just exhausted, but then my laughter stopped when I saw my coat hanging by the door. I don't own that coat. It looked like mine, navy blue, hooded, but it had a rip across the shoulder and a stain I didn't recognize. I stared at it for a long time. I even reached out and touched it. It was still damp, like someone had just come in from the rain. Except it wasn't raining. I backed up, heart thudding, and that's when I heard footsteps in the bedroom. Slow, measured, heavy. I should have left. I wanted to leave, but something in me wanted to see who or what was in there. I picked up the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, my umbrella, and pushed the door open. The light was on, my bed was perfectly made, and sitting on the edge of it was me. Same clothes, same face, same cut on my hand from when I broke a glass last night. Only this version of me smiled when I entered. "Long day?" he asked. His voice sounded like mine, but lower, slower, like he'd been practicing. I didn't answer. I just stared. He stood up and I realized he was taller by maybe half an inch. His eyes were darker, and then I saw something else. Behind him, through the open closet door, was another apartment. An identical one. The same furniture, the same bed, except empty. He noticed me looking. "You weren't supposed to come back so soon," he said. That's when I ran. I bolted out of the apartment, down the hall and into the stairwell. I didn't stop until I was outside in the cold air, my hands shaking so hard I dropped my keys. I called the police, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. "What do you say? There's another me in my apartment that smells wrong?" They came, looked around, found nothing. Everything was normal. My coat, the one with the rip, was gone. The clock was ticking the right way again. I'm staying at a motel tonight. I don't know what's waiting for me if I go back tomorrow. But here's the thing. When I was checking in just now, I caught my reflection in the glass door. And for a split second, I swear, my reflection smiled before I did. Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Tonight we have 9 scary stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Liking the video is the best way to let me know I'm doing a good job, and it also helps out the channel immensely. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated. I'm currently trying to reach 125,000 subscribers. The channel seems to be growing a little bit again lately, and I just wanted to say thank you to all of you, new and old. I love what I do, and the fact that I get to share it with anybody at all is very special to me. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. My cousin told me a curious thing once. "I don't believe in hell," he said. "There is no kind of pain that a person can't get used to, or even learn to appreciate." I've thought a lot about that. As long as we have the means to perceive our surroundings, we have the capability to appreciate it. If you've been on the internet long enough, you know what kind of absolutely vile things people have come to love. I don't believe I'm any different. It started back in 2016. I worked my second year as a lab assistant for a pharmaceutical company. A large Midwestern one with the blue sunflower logo. Lower end of the pay scale, high end of the benefits kind of gig. I didn't have that much going on in my life. It was just this endless cycle of overtime, sleep, and overtime again. I had an apartment on the 3rd floor, modern place with a huge elevator and reflective glass in the hallways. They had a deal with the company and offered a rent cut for everyone who worked there, making it a sort of corporate hangout spot along with a home. I thought I was going to hate it, but I ended up appreciating it. But there was a fire. I don't know what started it, but it turned the 1st floor into an inferno. I was fresh out of the shower when it happened, barely covering myself with a towel. The alarms blared. It was so quick. You can feel the flames eating the air around you before you feel the heat. A hitch in your throat. It was hot enough for you to get boils by just stepping into the hallway. I tried making my way downstairs, while my neighbor across the hall locked himself in his apartment. Last I saw of him, he and his family peeked at me through a closing door, their eyes reflecting the spreading flames from downstairs. I didn't make it far. Everything looks different in the smoke, and I got turned around. I tried to push forward, but it was too late. I knocked on doors, begging for shelter, but no one answered. I ended up in the corner of a hallway, pushed up against the elevator, feeling the heated metal melt the outer skin of my hand. Your throat closes up. You can see heat build on your arms, boils bursting like poxes. And before you pass out, you dissociate. You can't really believe it's happening. I knew I should have panicked, but I just shrugged it off. It wasn't real. It was like another world, another me. It wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. I never experienced anything like that in all my life, so it had to be a hallucination. But that's the thing about experiencing something for the first time. You don't realize what it is. That's the best way I can describe it. Dying. I was only out for a couple of seconds, maybe half a minute before the firefighters found me. They dragged me out and wrapped me in a blanket. I had second-degree burns all over, third-degree in some places. Those hurt less. It burns through the nerves. You don't feel that until you start to recover. Waking up was unreal. I didn't understand that I'd been bandaged all over my head. I just thought they'd turned off the lights. I couldn't feel a thing, courtesy of a more than generous corporate health insurance and an even more generous dose of morphine. I remember someone talking to me, but I could barely hear them on one side. An eardrum had ruptured, and my left ear had fused to the side of my hairless head. "Oh, thank God," a voice said. "Thank God you're gonna make it." My little sister, Sammy, she'd flown in from Ottawa. I was in and out of consciousness for days. I had nightmares about pain and anxiety about the drugs wearing off. Sometimes I'd hear machines beeping. Once a nurse changed a bandage, and it felt like getting my skin torn off. I remember drawing in a breath to scream, and then just gone. Blackout. I'd get these glimpses of real life sometimes. Someone humming in the hallway, my sister talking on her phone, a beam of light hitting the bandage across my eye, tickling a damaged membrane. I prayed not to feel anything because I knew that it'd just be more pain, unbearable, mind-numbing agony, your body turning inside and out, trying to heal everything at once, hitting biological dead ends over and over. I think it was night when someone came into my room. They talked to Sammy. They sounded apologetic. She cried. Then a little later, someone else came into the room. They had something else to say. Her tone changed. "Hope? Please," she said. "Whatever it takes." They rolled me into an elevator and then outside. There was a mild breeze that stung like nails on my missing skin. Transport. Sammy calling out in the distance. "We'll take good care of him." The prick of a needle. I couldn't feel a thing. I was out for at least 36 hours. When I came to, I was lying in a hospital bed, looking up at the ceiling. No bandages covering my face. A soft gray membrane covering my left eye. I blinked it away and instinctively raised my arm to wipe it off. The arm was covered in a thick, dark, ink-like substance. It clung to me like a putty, but I could barely feel it. I'd never seen anything like it before. My entire body was covered in it. It was on my face, too, even on my eyes. But it worked as a sort of one-way mirror. It didn't block my vision. The closer you looked, the more translucent it was. It was fine. No pain, no restricted movement. Nothing. I sat up, accidentally pulling out a couple of wires from my arm. I looked down at my body, only to see that all-covering ink putty dry up and sink into my skin, like morning dew on a dry lawn. Didn't feel a thing, not even a tickle. A nurse came running just moments later, ready to get to work. Sammy was with her, but when they saw me standing there, it was like there was a cooling breeze seeping through the room. The tensions just melted away. I'd never seen my sister in that state before, her hair having thinned at the edges of her ear, and the bags under her eyes looking purple, her face sunken, like she'd forgotten how to smile. But seeing me, she lit up like dawn. She ran up to me with her arms open but stopped. "Can I hug you?" she asked. "Are you okay?" "I think so," I said. "Yeah." So we hugged, and over her shoulder, I could see a corporate representative waiting for me in the hallway. If you were confused, just know that I was too. We're getting there. Information was spotty at best. Someone threw around a project called Black Bell. The name Super Adaptive Nano Liquid was mentioned a couple of times. Basically, Sammy had given them the go-ahead to try a new treatment. I must have been on the candidate list since I was a loyal worker, and leaking company secrets would not only get me sued, but cost me my career. Part of the deal was weekly checkups and participating in their trials. I could quit if I wanted to, but chances were that I'd go right back to that hospital bed if the treatment wasn't completed. I didn't really have a choice, but I didn't blame them for it. They had their own interests to look out for, and I'd been given this amazing opportunity. I could walk right out of there. That's worth an NDA. Coming back to the office a couple weeks later, there were some people talking about me. They said the treatment had been developed in one of our branch labs in Vietnam. It had been mentioned in a couple of memos as something tested in relation to vacuum treatment and low oxygen environments. I'd seen it too, but had no idea it had regenerative properties. I mean, you can read something on paper, but seeing it in action is another thing entirely. Most people didn't believe I'd really been in a fire. They thought I'd been taking time off, riding the coattails of an accident that consumed my apartment. I could have shown them pictures, but that would somehow make it even more unbelievable. I decided to let them think whatever they wanted. The higher-ups knew the truth, and that was all that mattered. So slowly, but surely, I got back into that endless cycle of overtime and sleep. Sammy was sticking around for a while to make sure I managed, but apart from that, it was business as usual. Of course, what you see on the surface isn't always telling the whole story. I'd stay up at night imagining that excruciating pain writhing just underneath my skin. What if there was a hiccup in the treatment, or some kind of side effect? Could all of it really come back? Could one wrong step send me back to the hospital bed? I'd lose hours of sleep worrying, looking up at the ceiling of my new bedroom, closing my eyes but not sleeping, still feeling the heat of the flames licking my skin, the hair on my arms curling up to die, little parts of me blending with the ashes, the smell of my own flesh cooking. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was 2 weeks into my new routine when I had my first panic attack. Someone brought in a birthday cake to work, and they blew out the candles over lunch. There was something about the faint glow of fire reflecting on their skin that sent a spiral of thoughts rushing through me. Heat. My pulse ran away from me. I could imagine my skin trying to sweat, but the pores being melted shut. The pain I imagined wasn't real, but the memories it brought on sent it all to the forefront of my mind. I politely declined a piece of cake and ran to the bathroom. I threw up and curled into a corner, forcing my eyes shut. But no matter how hard I tried, I felt the pain, a mild heat latching onto me, burying itself in my skin. You can't think away a panic attack. You just have to ride it out and wish the next one is shorter. Talking to Sammy about it over dinner, she decided to stick around for a few more weeks. I hadn't asked her to do it, but she was happy to. She'd made baked potatoes. I'd forgotten to buy new cutlery and plates, so we had to settle for paper plates and plastic forks. A single naked light bulb hung overhead. "You talk in your sleep, you know," she mentioned as the oven dinged. "I hear it through the walls." "What do I say?" "It's not really words, it's just like sounds," she said. "Long, drawn-out vowels. But it kinda sounds like words." "I'll try to keep it down." She gave me an apologetic look. She knew I couldn't control it, and she knew I couldn't try even if I wanted to. But it was a nice thought. It got worse, though. I would have nightmares and wake up choking. I'd feel my skin getting warmer at night. My anxiety would pop off at seemingly random times, kicking me out of whatever comfort zone I had managed to make for myself. It could strike fast and stick around all day. After a while, it was more unusual for me to have a good day than a bad one. Coming home from work one day, I stopped at a light. I sat in my car, hands on the wheels, seeing the light turn red as I came to a full stop. The radio jockey chuckled about putting on some classic dad rock for a caller, and put on Kiss with the song Hotter Than Hell. It's a nice song, but it put my mind in an uncomfortable place. I stared at that red light, hoping I wouldn't see the yellow light. Something about the glow of it put me right back there in the hallway, squirming around on the floor. The meat on my hand getting cooked on the surface of the heated metal elevator door. I closed my eyes and felt something. A soft, cooling coat expanded across my skin. The treatment, it was still there. I remember someone honking. Maybe the light had turned green, but I couldn't risk looking. I couldn't open my eyes. Maybe it would hurt. Maybe it had all turned dark. 100 maybes, locking my hands on the steering wheel and keeping my eyes closed. Then, a flicker. It's like I manifested it, a spark reacting with my skin. Fire. It must have looked like an explosion, all the air getting sucked out at once, breaking the windows. The car popped from the release pressure as the entire car lit up. Ungodly pain. I couldn't scream. A single flame danced on my eyes as they fused shut. Nerve endings exploded with agony as the bones on my knuckles exposed themselves to the open air. It happened so fast, like someone shutting off the lights inside your mind one by one. Sight, smell, hearing, taste, touch, thought. You can't breathe. There is no air. You don't know what you're doing. You can't feel yourself. Are you standing up? Sitting down? Impossible to tell. They say I was completely engulfed in flames for a solid 2 minutes before a passerby managed to pull me out of the wreckage. They said I was covered in a black liquid, which they thought was motor oil. I was dropped onto the pavement and the flames were put out by bystanders. The treatment kept me alive through all of it. Alive, but suffering. It kept me on the edge of life, not allowing me to cross over, and the agony stuck with me for what felt like an eternity. But eventually the sirens came. The EMTs would never hear of what would be a second miraculous burn victim recovery. I'd walk out of that hospital a couple of days later without any questions asked. The treatment put me right back into square one. Perfect physical condition, with a couple of mental asterisks. Well, the firefighters didn't understand what happened. The corporation did. Apparently my ceaseless obsession with fire was triggering an adaptive reaction. Basically, I was tricking myself. By thinking so much about burning, it became the normal state of being, and the treatment adapted to it. It basically thought I wanted to burn, so it set me on fire. At least that's how it was explained to me. Knowing the cause of the issue helped, but also not. It's hard to put yourself in a state of mind where you're not allowing yourself to think certain things. It's like biting your nails or picking your nose. Thinking of how you can't do it makes it worse. Knowing that thinking too much about this one thing might cause a fire was all-consuming as the flames themselves. Sammy didn't leave me, though. She figured out a couple of things we could do to alleviate stress. For example, I could start sleeping in the bathtub, and we could remove anything flammable. No drapes, no plastics. We also kept a fire blanket nearby. It was uncomfortable, but you can get used to anything. It was nice to know that it was there in case I needed it. A precaution. It puts you at ease, and you stop obsessing over it as much. I'd go to weekly checkups. They'd had me fill out forms, rating sensations and experiences on scales from 1 to 10, and rarely too often. A lot of it was generalized questions, but a couple of them were specifically made for me. These questions didn't have a standard answering sheet. There'd be some overpaid academic listing off questions with a nonchalant smile. Every week, a different smile, but the same attitude. I got the impression that I wasn't the only one testing this treatment. The questions they asked implied that others were having trouble as well, but in completely different ways. Multiple choice questions like, how often do you forget to breathe? How often do you forget to sleep? How much has your sense of touch diminished? With possible answers ranging from hourly to monthly. I made more adjustments in my everyday life. Fire blankets, extinguishers. Once I filled the tub with water before sleeping, as I felt an episode coming on. The ink would seep out of my skin to keep me from going hypothermic. It really was adaptive. Sammy did her best to help, but something she said stuck with me. As I was heading to work, she took some time cleaning out the tub. I asked her if she was okay doing that. It's not that different from changing bandages, she said. You gotta adapt either way. At least there's no pain, right? Trauma seeps into you like a poison. The bad days become the new normal, and the good days become this impossible deal you strive to get. That perfect day without that sinking feeling in your chest, where you can sleep a little longer without waking up tired, where you can say you had a nice dream and can afford to put some effort into caring for yourself, have that extra long shower, the freshly pressed clothes. But I couldn't do that. I'd be balancing on the edge, ready to burst into flames. I wouldn't wear my best clothes. I'd stay in the tub at night. I would keep my distance from my sister and my coworkers. All these little things you do to keep yourself from becoming a problem. And even then, things would spiral out of control. It happened once as I was going from the supermarket to my car. I didn't even know what made me snap. Suddenly, it was all just fire. I burned all my groceries and was left exposed in the parking lot, covered in ash and writhing in pain. It was a short enough burn for my nerves to stay, making me feel every boil and crack in the skin, blood and soot on the concrete. The most embarrassing time it happened was at work. I felt it coming, and I hid in the bathroom again. As the flames burst out, the fire alarm tripped. Sprinklers came on. I got a nasty burn, but not as bad as the other times. I could still walk out of there. I draped myself in a jacket and had to walk out in front of all of my coworkers, naked from the waist down and covered in boils. After that, I was put on paid leave while my treatment continued. We were going to work out an action plan with a therapist, but they had some trouble getting one that was accessible at this level of corporate secrecy. So while it dragged on, all I could do was wander around and try my best not to think of something that could burn my house down at a moment's notice. It was getting to me, and I suspect, to Sammy as well. One night, it happened in the bath. I had an awful dream which shook me right awake. The bathroom was pitch black. Despite my eyes being open, it was dark. That it spiraled into this thought of my eyes having fused shut. It pushed that first domino in my chest, and by the time I got out of the bath, I was on fire, casting crawling shadows along the walls. Sammy came running. She tried to help, but ended up burning her hands. I pushed her away, giving her another burn on her neck. I pulled myself into the bath and turned on the water. It's hard to do when you don't have any skin on your fingers. Blood is slippery, and the knobs in the shower can be a bit finicky. The fire alarm was going crazy, but Sammy managed to turn it off. Concerned neighbors came knocking at the door, and she had to turn them away with a bleeding neck and hands. And I just lay in the bath, watching the last embers on my skin disappear, putting me back in the soothing dark. I locked the door, begging for the night to be over. Things got complicated after that. Of course, Sammy didn't want to leave, but the bandages on her neck and hands broke my heart. The way she winced as she made herself a peanut butter jelly sandwich, the salt stinging her wounds. I lied to her and said the company was bringing over a live-in care provider. It wasn't completely untrue. It had been discussed, in passing. I waved goodbye to Sammy from the kitchen window. A cab drove off with her, and I could finally relax. She was out of harm's way. My way. I tried to deal with my anxiety in other ways. I went out a lot. Booze helps a bit, especially if there's a lot of distractions. Live bands playing loud music, pretty girls waving their long hair around. Anything to get the finger in your mind away from the first domino that sends you spiraling into oblivion. I thought I could make something fun out of it. Once, when I got really drunk, I tried showing it as a party trick to a couple of barflies. They thought I was kidding around, that I was some kind of fire breather or something. So when I willingly set myself on fire, they were horrified. They didn't know about my treatment, so when the dark ink covered my skin, it looked like I'd been turned into coal. Their eager twisted as they ran screaming back into the bar. One of them called the police. Another fainted. They covered their noses, trying not to breathe in my fumes. I locked my knees into place, forcing my body to stay upright past the snapping musculature. My head dangled as my neck gave out. I fell face first into a puddle, but the treatment stopped me from suffocating. An inch of water, and it would have killed me. By the time a patrol arrived, I was long gone, leaving my tattered clothes in a black pile. I knew the roads well enough. I didn't care anymore. Coming home that night, I considered my options. I could keep going down this path, hoping something would change, or I could struggle and kick my way through a life lived on the precipice of pain. No matter what I did, there'd always be that fear brewing in the back of my mind, reminding me that I was never far away from the gates of my own hell. I sat on my balcony for a while, looking up at the stars. There was something beautiful there, a kinship. They burned too, but they hadn't known another life. Perhaps that was the way to go. The next day I took my car and drove into the desert. I parked and left a note. No valuables. I hid the keys under the front tire, stripped down, and put my clothes under the hood. There was no paint in them getting burned. I wanted a fresh pair when I got back. If I got back. Then I walked. I felt the sun on my skin, and I sensed the heat boiling at the edge of my mind. Come on, I muttered. Come on. I made myself think of it. I forced myself into it. I kicked myself down the black spiral in my mind and let the impressions take over. Come on, I begged. Get it over with. And when the flames came, I was relieved. I just let it happen. The fires burning my eyes shut and sucking the air out of my lungs. My body crackling and popping, breaking at the seams with every twist and turn. Your senses disappear. You can't scream. And with the treatment keeping me alive, I locked myself in a spiraling struggle as my body was repaired and burned over and over. Acrid flesh, ammonia, and burnt hair coming and going as my sense of smell circled. Flashes of light as my cornea struggled to remain. A violent tinnitus coming and going, like a breathing wave crashing into my skull. Never-ending pain, the kind of agony where a second turns into lifetimes. But it was too late. There was no one coming to save me. What had I done? You don't really taste anything. There might be little spots of blood leaving an impression of iron on your tongue, but it came and went. Same with touch. It would be pain or nothing. After a while, I stopped trying to breathe. I let my throat stay closed, and the treatment would keep me alive. I would feel my heart slowing, adapting, realizing that if I was calculated, I could make micro movements in bouts of muscular repair, meaning if I tried long enough, I could move, but only so slightly. I remember laying in the sand. The flashes of light were darker. It must have been night. I'd managed to move my hand straight into view so I could see my own fingers. There'd be darkness, a little light from the moon, a flash of clarity showing a coal-wrapped, skeletonized hand. Liquidized boiled fat staining the black sands around me. I tried to think, but even my brain was affected. There'd be long stretches of time where I sensed this gate in the back of my head, barring me from chasing any complicated thoughts. I couldn't remember my name. I could just think of something short and immediate, bursts of effort and strain. As my lungs came and went, I could think of sounds to make, vowels mostly. I settled on a couple that I found easy to repeat, just to remind myself that I was alive. E and O sounded particularly nice. E-O, E-O, E-O. As I couldn't see or hear anything, my mind started to fill in the blanks. The waves of painful screeching in my ear started to sound like voices and music. The flickering lights began to look like angels. I would have conversations with them, and the pain would lull into a background noise, a nuisance at most. I'd have these presences sit down next to me. One had a voice like a beautiful piano, talking sonatas that would make me weep. Another would lie down next to me and wrap their arms around me, their breath on my neck like a soothing wind. They'd whisper of beautiful places and far-off lands, a beach where no one is alone, an island paradise where the sands are pink, a tree that reaches for the moon wanting to go home. Little stories and melodies playing in the fire, begging me to stay. I could feel my needs melting away. When you're at the bottom of every sensation, there's no point in trying to look up. What's a glass of water when your world is on fire? What's a night of sleep when you are living in a nightmare? I let it all go, embracing the pain. It was so easy. After a while, I realized I could direct my efforts, like managing a switchboard. Keep the eyes off, I'd think. Keep the eyes and the ears off. Instead, I'd focus on the muscles, keeping me at intense pain levels but allowing me to move, to touch. I don't know if anyone saw me. I don't think they did. But if anyone had seen me, they'd have seen a charred body rise from the ashes facing the moon. I'd wander the sands, inviting the pain into the soles of my feet. I didn't care about stepping on branches or rocks. I'd feel the wind fanning the flames, fueling me like an engine. The more I moved, the more it hurt, and the more I could keep going. And as I moved, air would push into my lungs, leaving me with enough room to scream, and with that I'd howl at the moon like a beast. E-O, E-O, E-O. Time would pass, and it wouldn't. Your days don't really start, or end. It all just keeps going. What was real and what wasn't would be blurred, making me chase thoughts I didn't know I had. I'd make up words that even a burned mouth could say, borrowing meaning from whispers in the fire, words with depth and power that I'd forget in a second, or an hour. There was no way to tell. I would imagine other burning people walking alongside me. Sometimes I would see them dancing at the edge of my vision, Long, elegant movement with trails of smoke puffing into the sky. Little lights allowing themselves to burn out and die. I'd cry for them, laugh at them, and all the while I suffered, but that was normal. I'd fall to my knees and stay there smoldering, not moving an inch. I'd give in to the thoughts that trickled into sparks of consciousness, becoming a conduit to whatever spoke through me. Vowels trickling past broken teeth. A prayer, perhaps. My most vivid memory is that moment when I'm kneeling in the sand. Even with my eyes closed, I could tell I wasn't in our world anymore. I was in a world of fire, praying to an ocean of molten steel, another dead man propped up to suffer. E-O, E-O, E-O. The burning angels would listen and dance. The ocean of pain would soothe me. There was no heat anymore. It was home. I'd finally reached the other side of the shore, where pain was life and being without it was agony. I'd adapted. I'd learned. I'd been perfected, and I came home. I opened my eyes. They'd follow me through. A dozen others, wielding the same black ink across their bodies. They'd adapted too. They'd been made tall and strong and mad. They'd wandered other worlds, exposed to other horrors, and they'd been made grateful just like me. Brothers, sisters, a family carved from agony and blisters. I'd go from ecstasy to ceaseless horror. I'd felt like time had stopped, and that I was settling into a strange eternity, one where complete inaction was the only logical thing to pursue. Turning myself static, I could feel what that first fire had felt, warming our ancestors. I was on the wrong side of life, looking out at those struggling. I was beyond them, but something in me was still too human to accept it. But I was getting there, and it was so comfortable. A life without worries means a life without drive. But is that such a bad thing? Then a drop of water. I didn't feel the first one, but as the rain gathered, the flames died. I'd been in pain so long that being without it made me sick. All those little systems of my body that I'd forgotten were cast away, coming back to me. Eyes, ears, taste. Each and every one more terrible than the other. I cried and begged the heavens to send me back, but I was forgetting the right words, and the broken spots in my brain were coming back to me. The heavens couldn't hear me, and I couldn't make them listen. I lay there for hours, hoping I would dream myself back to that other world where I belonged, but I'd lost it. My car had been towed. People had looked for me, but they hadn't found me. All in all, I figured I'd been gone for a couple of days at most. Turns out, it was 16 days in total. A lot of people thought I'd been kidnapped or killed, and for the second time in less than a year, Sammy would see me come back from the dead. The treatment was deemed too dangerous. They didn't specify why. Maybe the discussion with the therapist got a little out of hand when I started to talk about ink-covered angels. Or maybe it was my desire to put myself back on fire. Either way, they had a kill switch to deactivate the entire thing, and they used it. Made me cough up something akin to a metal glob. They put it on a metal tray and moved it to a liquid nitrogen container with a stylized blue sunflower logo. It was strange, looking at the treatment like a separate physical thing. It had been part of me, and losing it felt like removing a vestigial organ. I knew I should have felt different once it was off, but I didn't. I still had the same thoughts, the same problems, but now that I thought about the fires, I didn't know whether to long for them or cower in fear. Maybe both. At least I don't have to worry about hurting anyone. I was still on paid leave. I moved in with Sammy for a while just to get a change in environment. I met some new people and grounded myself a bit. It's so easy to lose sight of the little things when your mind is in 10 different places.
Sometimes you don't need much to make your day. A pat on the shoulder, a cool drink after a long day. The little things can do wonders. I eventually made my way back home. I returned to the office. I got a new place that didn't have a bathtub. I started talking to people without shying away, and I'd keep my eyes on the traffic lights when I came to a full stop. I'd cross the line where pain didn't scare me anymore. When you have known what I know, everything else seems dull in comparison, and if push comes to shove, I've lived through the worst of it. I wouldn't mind seeing it again someday. This was years ago, and my life looks very different today. I'm engaged and I live in a new town, new job, same company. I got a dog. But even now, as all things lull into a new normality, I think of those days. On the darkest nights, I can picture those ink-covered beings out there, watching over me from afar, waiting for me to remember and come home. I fear I might still have a part of me stuck in that place, that someday I'll just snap. And I don't know what's worse, to be paralyzed by fear or to long for it. Much like my cousin, I don't believe in hell. I don't think we can suffer forever. And sometimes when it rains, I long to burn. I've never been a squeamish person. You need to have a strong stomach in a profession like mine. 10 years as a physician will force you to see all kinds of things to keep you up at night. Third-degree burn victims with skin like rusted metal. Harlequin babies that won't live past 12 hours. And grown men sobbing after pulling the plug on their mother that their health insurance wouldn't cover to keep breathing. I've seen it all. Sometimes I wish I hadn't. And yet it was something so simple that broke me. It was a case you see every day. At least, that's how it started. I still remember it all so clearly. A man was rushed into the emergency room after losing control of his car and landing it squarely in a ditch. He had 3 fractured vertebrae in his spine, as well as a rib going directly into his heart. It was a miracle he was still breathing. It was standard procedure. We carted him in and immediately began blood transfusion and monitoring his heartbeats. He kept murmuring as we hooked him up to our equipment, so faintly, but you could almost make out, "Please, stop." At the time, I assumed it was shock getting to his head. Retrospect has such a cruel way of working the things you see when it's already too late. We were just about to begin an emergency thoracotomy to revolve the rip when he flatlined. We immediately got the defibrillators and began trying to resuscitate him. Clear! Clear! It was no use. His heart hadn't beaten in 10 minutes. He was dead. Was dead. And then something odd happened. His heart began beating again. It didn't make any sense. We hadn't used the defibrillators in the past 5 minutes. I didn't bother speculating on what restarted it. I was just happy to not lose a patient. As I walked beside him to transfer him for surgery, I saw tears had streamed down the man's face. At the time, I thought it was an involuntary reaction or a subconscious relief of surviving. I know better now. I couldn't let a miracle like this slip through my fingers. We carted him to surgery for the emergency thoracotomy. Those 2 hours are seared into my mind. The first incision made it clear something was terribly wrong. The smell, my God, the smell. It was like roadkill mixed with raw sewage that had been left out in the sun. Even through my mask it hit me like a freight train, filling the room like a blossoming spore. One of the other surgeons began dry heaving, and it took every ounce of strength in my body not to vomit. That should have been it. I should have just walked right out then. I don't know why I pushed through. Maybe some misplaced sense of duty. Whatever it was, it forced me to continue with the operation. The blood that came out of him was thick, like rotten molasses. The more we opened him up, the more unexplainable horrors we saw. His ribs, which by all means should have been broken, appeared to be in the process of healing. Actually, healing isn't the right word. It was more like regrowing, thin blood vessels and bone marrow, peeking out like bot flies and skin, wiggling as if gasping for air. His lungs were filled with giant, calloid-covered wounds. It was as if someone had stabbed him over and over. Any hole this big should have killed him instantly, let alone 20 in each lung, and yet every single hole had been crushed shut with dried blood, as if they were nothing more than annoying scabs. Then veins around the scar tissue of each hole were black and green, clearly infected. The worst was his heart. Jesus, his heart. It was brown, rotten blood and mucus seeping through it like water through a towel. There were tendrils of tissue growing from the base of it around the broken rib, like the roots of a tree. It was as if the body had healed around it. Each tendril was throbbing, slowly burrowing into the bone, anchoring it in place. A silence fell over the room for what felt like hours, but it was probably only a minute or so. What am I looking at? The other surgeon's voice was shaking. I'd never heard him so scared before. Necrosis. This is not necrosis. I've seen necrosis. It doesn't turn your blood into syrup. The smell in the tissue as well as the discoloration indicates necrosed tissue and sepsis. We'll treat the sepsis and remove the dead tissue after we remove the obstruction. Necrosis from what? The rib has only been in there a few hours. There wasn't enough time for any of that tissue to die, let alone rot. And besides, look at his heart. He shouldn't even be breathing. We can speculate later, but right now our priorities are keeping this man alive. Scalpel. He handed me the scalpel, and I slowly began cutting the tendrils that had latched onto the bone. With every incision, a small hiss would emanate, screaming like a dying animal. It took hours, but we finally got the rib removed, along with some of the necrosed tissue. There was no way to get all of it out at once. There was no way to get it all out at all, actually. How were you supposed to remove 2 lungs and an entire heart and expect someone to live enough to perform a transplant? The best we could do was hook him up on some incredibly strong antibiotics and pray that worked until we came up with further treatment. That treatment never came. 2 nights after I sewed him shut, the man jumped out the window of his room. He was on the 11th floor, or in other words, roughly 110 feet above the ground. I wish I had stayed behind when we all ran to the parking lot that day. His body was writhing reddish-brown mess. Screams of what sounded like at least a dozen men emanated from the air, piercing the ears of everyone near it. His ribs stretched like millipede legs, scratching at the cement of the parking lot, trying desperately to get traction. His spine flailed like an unmanned watering hose. The worst part was the face. His head had been partially crushed from the impact, and his upper face was still mostly intact. His eye, ever so slightly pushed out of socket, looked at me, begging, pleading, praying to be put out of its misery. There was something else in there. Hate. Red-hot, boiling hatred for me. Me. My God, the way it looked at me. That bloodshot abyss poured into my soul, into my very being. I could practically hear it scolding me, screaming at me. You did this to me. You kept me alive. How dare you think you could do this to me? Look at me. Look at what you've done. I didn't even realize I was screaming till the police came. I don't really remember what happened after that. The sound and smell of it all is the only thing that sticks in my mind. Yelling, gunshots, crying, cursing, crunching, smoke, and then finally silence. I never saw the body get carted away. I couldn't bear to look at it again, any of it again. I resigned the next day and never looked back. I'm in therapy now, and from what I'm being told, I'm recovering quite well. The nightmares have stopped. I can sleep peacefully now. Almost. I see it all when I close my eyes. The blood, the bones, the torn skin, and that eye. That eye. No matter where I go, that eye will follow me, and I will always feel its gaze. Its hate. The cold metal ground hurt my back to lay on. God, I hate back pain. Wait, why was I sleeping on the ground? In fact, I don't actually know where I am or how I got here. Have I always been here? I have no memories before this exact moment, yet I felt my developed brain's instincts. I felt my consciousness. I felt my fear. I felt my loneliness, even though the sounds of functioning machinery suggested I was surrounded by people. Do they know how we got here? I stood up to see a small, unimpressive room filled with all kinds of equipment. None of the equipment appeared to have a point, yet several people worked mindlessly with no clear goal. The sound was unbearably loud and unendingly obnoxious. It's a wonder how I slept at all, with the deafening industrial racket. I took in my surroundings the best I could, but the lighting was dull and there were no windows. It was neither hot nor cold. There were no clocks or ways to track time at all. I found myself at the back of the factory. Dude. A woman with grime coating her pale skin head to toe was shifting levers back and forth while dripping sweat. Start working. He's watching. She kept her voice lowered, but she raised a bony finger towards the cameras in the corner of the room. An unconvincing and cartoonish camera swiveled back and forth. I simply looked at the dirty worker, and I continued looking around without acknowledging the warning. I felt her scowl intensify as I walked away from her, but I couldn't find myself to care. As I wandered through the narrow paths, each person looked at me with different expressions, all of which were in different levels of anguish and frustration. It also seemed to be confusing to everyone I passed to see me not working alongside them. Without breaking the monotony of useless work, they watched me walk past them towards what I deemed to be the front of the factory. As I approached the wall opposite of the one I woke up near, I noticed a roped-off section that divided the room. Beyond the rope, a small group of men sat on the only chairs I've seen in the entire building. They looked content and very relaxed. That was until they saw my confused face. Upon seeing me, expressions twisted into anger. A fat little man squinted his eyes and turned a deep crimson as he spit. What the hell are you doing? Don't you know you're supposed to be working? No, not really, I answered honestly. The worker closest to me shot her head up to see who dared to speak back to the clique behind the rope. This guy. Another ghostly white man groaned. He's lucky we're not ripping hearts out anymore. Ripping our hearts? As the question escaped my lips, they chuckled at my ignorance. Yeah, kid, get back to work, another man hissed. So you aren't ripping out hearts now? Why should I work? I asked. Oh my god, you're still here? The fat man wailed in rage. If you don't do as we say, the boss will send you to the basement. Gasps from behind me suggested this isn't the first time they've threatened people with the supposed horrors of the basement. It, however, did not impress me. Who's the boss and what happens in the basement? Simply asking the questions seemed to make everyone in the room uncomfortable in different ways. The man behind the rope only got angry. My lack of blind allegiance baffled my peers as much as it did the men. The boss created all of this. Just like what you see here, there is also an upstairs and a downstairs. A voice explained just out of sight. The man speaking was so far behind the rope, he was covered in shadows. Everyone shut up to listen to him, so I concluded he was likely the highest authority in the room. If you don't work, the boss will send you to the basement to have your legs broken. Oh wow, that's messed up, I responded. No, he's the most loving guy in the entire factory. He made everything you see around you. The shadowy man corrected me. But you guys were ripping out hearts for him, I asked. Well, yeah, but his son used to work here. He let us rip his heart out after a few years so that we never have to do it again, he said, completely serious. We used this knife, and that's why we all hang a tiny golden knife around all our necks, he said, pulling the symbol out of his shirt. Wait, so the boss required you to rip out hearts. Then you worked with his son, and he allowed you to rip his out, and now you don't do it. Why the hell do you have to rip out hearts to begin with? And you think he's a cool guy? He is love. A demonic growl shook in his throat. And have any of you met this boss? I asked. He works upstairs, and you can only meet him once you're promoted. So you work for someone who you've never met. Then how do you know the factory worker was his son when you ripped out his heart? He was really nice, and he told me how awesome his dad was. The fat man chimed in. But none of you have been promoted, so how do you even know if he's even up there to begin with? I kept grilling because nothing made sense to me. The entire factory chose to follow a man they've never seen, and this group of men are acting as an authority for nothing more than a hypothesis. I saw the stairs that led up to a closed door, and I saw a set of stairs leading down to a destination unknown. All I saw was it descending into a dark nothingness. The shadow man pointed to the stairs. All people denying his authority go to the basement. No one has ever gone down there to find out how serious the boss can be. Okay, fine. Let's see the basement. Even louder gasps had the entire factory in shock. The men behind the rope froze. Never before has a person challenged the authenticity of their claims to this extent, for not even they have challenged them. Amongst the shock, smirks slowly replaced their faces. A cocky, cheek-to-cheek grin adorned the shadowy man's face as he approached the rope, yet his eyes remained in darkness. Right this way. Down to the basement I descended out of sight as laughter harmonized with the sound of my feet on each step. There was a complete absence of light, and it was very cold. After what seemed like ages, I made it to the landing. Without light, I had to feel the walls to make my way down the corridor. It was just a few feet in when I reached a dead end. There was nothing. No people, no equipment. Nothing. My lungs were burning by the time I made it back up the stairs. As the factory came back in sight, no one seemed to notice I had re-entered until I was midway up the stairs leading to the boss's office. Wait, no one's allowed to see the boss. Shadows no longer hid his face. He was nothing but a petrified child. Then break my legs, I said, and I twisted the knob and pushed. The door swung open easily, revealing the serene and peaceful nature of the world outside. Such awe-inspiring beauty and freedom was laying behind the doors the entire time. A world away from a factory that produced nothing, led by people exploiting baseless beliefs. And it was so much more impressive than any boss. It was especially more majestic than a system where the guy who required hearts to be ripped out was threatening to break your legs if you didn't adopt his law. Even with the knowledge they had, and the obvious moral corruption of their boss, they still choose to waste their time working for him without investigating his validity. I stepped out of the pit of useless despair and looked down at the men who should know better, and the poor people they led to believe they should never question the boss. "Hey, see? You're all wrong and wasting your time," I yelled down to them. Silently they watched me stand above them, and the useless factory continued to roar. My friend Carla had a knack for giving you exactly what you needed, even if you didn't know it yourself. For my 26th birthday, we went to a nightclub. It had been an especially sunny day, not a single cloud in the sky. Still, she gave me a yellow umbrella that looked like it came from an antique shop. I thought it was ugly and absurd, especially since she knew I hated bright colors. But as we stepped outside, an unexpected downpour started, even though the forecast had promised clear skies. At Christmas, she gave me a gift card for a store. The very next day, a website glitched, offered all merchandise at 90% off. With the $50 on her card, I bought thousands of dollars worth of clothes. And that was nothing compared to her gift at her nephew Lucas's christening. She gave the baby a black cat, fully aware that the mother, her sister, was allergic. It all made sense 2 days later when the cat caught a huge rat crawling in through the baby's room ventilation. Apparently, the child had been having health issues related to infections, and thanks to the cat, they discovered the source and fixed it once and for all. Everyone in our group noticed those strange coincidences. We used to joke she was a witch. She'd just laugh and say it was luck, that her method was simple. She flipped a coin 3 times. She did it to decide which store to enter, what to buy, even what time to leave the house. If she got 3 heads, she went ahead. If not, she changed the plan. We always laughed at that, grateful for her gifts. But something changed this year. Yesterday was my birthday. The conversation was lively, the music loud. My cousin Valeria nailed it with her mimosas. My coworkers praised the snacks. My friend Juan told stories from his trip to the Amazon. Even though the party was a success, Carla looked uneasy. She sat in the corner of the couch with a glass full of wine, not speaking to anyone. That was unusual for her. She was normally outgoing and full of light. She kept glancing at the hallway, the window, the stairs, as if expecting something, or someone, to appear out of nowhere. I walked over and asked if everything was okay. She looked nervously at her gift, stacked with the others. She said she'd felt off all day, a tight anxiety in her chest. She couldn't explain it. Then she admitted it had something to do with her gift, that she was embarrassed about it. She leaned in, lips tight, and murmured, "Open it when everyone's gone, please." I was about to agree when my boyfriend shouted, "Open the presents! Open the presents!" The pressure from the group did the rest. Carla lowered her gaze. Her discomfort made me nervous. That afternoon, while we were setting up for the party, I'd felt something strange. Nothing specific, just a vague discomfort, like the air was heavier. At one point I could have sworn I saw a shadow move in the hallway as I passed the kitchen, but when I looked, nothing was there. I figured maybe it was the lights, or just my imagination. I shook my head and went back to prepping drinks and music. There was too much to focus on. I started opening presents. My friends had outdone themselves this year. One even gave me a ticket to see my favorite band. I saved Carla's box for last. It was rectangular and soft, with rounded edges, wrapped in yellow paper and a red ribbon. Attached was a note that read, "To Julian, may you have many more birthdays." Everyone waited eagerly, holding their breath, convinced it would be another example of her mysterious gift-giving. Slowly I tore open the yellow paper and opened the box. A carton of eggs. The silence was suffocating. 12 white eggs. No one knew what to say, until my boyfriend let out a nervous laugh. Soon everyone burst into laughter. I laughed with them and joked, "Looks like your gift-giving powers are running low." Carla held my gaze and smiled, but her eyes remained uneasy. "It's what you need," she said quietly. "The coin said so." That phrase unsettled me more than it should have. I drank too much that night. We went to bed without cleaning up. We didn't realize we'd left Carla's gift on the kitchen floor. A seemingly insignificant detail. Until now. I'm standing outside my house watching the police carry out a body. Solomon Garcia. The serial killer who had terrorized the city for a year. He would hide in his victim's home for 30 days before murdering them in their sleep. It was going to be our turn, but this time he didn't get the chance. He slipped in the kitchen. His head slammed into the countertop, dead on impact. Beside him, the crushed carton of eggs. I imagine him entering my kitchen, the crunch of eggs underfoot, and then a dull thud. Flesh against concrete, his limp body on the white tile floor, life slipping away. The thought makes me sick. The police keep asking if I'd noticed anything strange. Unusual noises, missing food, how long since I'd checked the guest room closet. That's where they found a calendar, 30 days marked off. My stomach churns as they question me. I can't stop thinking about Carla, about her nervous look, about the coin falling once, twice, 3 times into her palm. How did she know? Did she suspect something? Am I really still alive thanks only to chance? To something as arbitrary and fragile as luck? What if I hadn't opened her gift that night? What if she had felt too ashamed to give it to me, or even to come to the party? A cold breeze runs down my spine, but one thing's for sure. I'll always gladly accept any gift from Carla. Whatever it is. I always double-check the lock on our apartment door. Not because I'm paranoid. Well, maybe a little, but because it's a strange mechanism. You can't just turn a key and walk away. You have to twist the handle to the right, then lock it. If it's twisted left, it stays locked. If it's straight, the door opens. Simple in theory, but easy to mess up. I live with my younger sister, Al, in a 2-bedroom apartment. The hallway from my front door is long. Her room comes first, then mine. Neither of us can see the entry or living room from our beds. The building's relatively secure, but I've read enough late-night Reddit rabbit holes to know that safety is sometimes just an illusion. And if we're being honest, I'd be an easy target. I'm clumsy, always carrying something, too trusting, not exactly trained for fight or flight. But we'll unpack my weaknesses another day. It was a normal night, around 9:30 p.m. I crawled into bed, got cozy, and asked Al to check the door. She mumbled something like, "Yup," from her room. Good enough for me. I fell asleep. At about 12:30 a.m. I woke up. The wind outside was howling. The blinds were smacking the window like they were trying to escape. I groaned, got up, shut the window, and slid back under the blanket. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not from outside, from inside the apartment. They were near my door. Quiet, cautious. Then they moved off, toward the living room. My heart began to pound. I straightened to listen. Maybe it was Al. But then I heard it. Chewing. Not soft, regular chewing. This was wet, rapid, almost animal-like. The kind of sound a squirrel makes when it finds something tough to crack. Smack, smack, click, gnaw. Pauses in between. followed by sudden bursts of messy, frantic bites. I couldn't move, couldn't even swallow. Then came the familiar creak of the sofa. Something, or someone, had sat down. I listened harder, barely breathing. A faint tap, tap, tap followed, like someone swinging their legs, kicking playfully against the couch frame. Rhythmic, casual, like they were waiting for something. My skin crawled. If someone had broken in, they would have passed my sister's room first. Was she okay? I needed to get to her, but the thought of stepping into that hallway, with whatever that was just meters away, made my body lock up in panic. Then the chewing stopped and the footsteps came back. This time they were heading to my door. Each step was deliberate, heavy but slow. The kind of walk that says, I know exactly where you are. I had to think fast. There was a smart lamp in the living room I could control from my phone. Shaking, I reached over and opened the app. I turned the lamp on, bright white, then blue, then red. Flicker, flicker. Distraction. Please work. The footsteps paused. Then they turned around back to the living room. I didn't wait. I slipped out of my room and crept into Al's. Her door was closed, but I eased it open with shaking hands. She was there, sleeping soundly. I rushed to her side and shook her gently but urgently. Get up. We need to go. Quietly. She blinked, still groggy, but something in my face made her nod. Together we crawled to the hallway. I could still hear faint movement in the living room. Shuffling, shifting. We held our breath. Then, it noticed. The footsteps stopped, and then came the sprint. It charged. The footsteps thundered toward us with a speed that didn't feel human. We screamed. I yanked open the front door and we tore down the hallway toward the elevators. One was already waiting. We jumped in, slammed the ground button, and the doors began to close. And then, just as they were about to shut, I made the mistake of looking back. Standing in the hallway was someone who looked just like me, except half her face was wrapped in gauze, stained dark with fresh blood. Her head tilted, slightly too far, her arm lifted, elbow bent at the wrong angle, like a puppet trying to mimic something it didn't understand. And then, she smiled. Not wide, not dramatic, just enough to show she knew I was watching. The doors closed. We got outside and called the police. What followed was a blur. Questions, searches, officers walking through our apartment with flashlights. They found nothing. No forced entry, no signs of tampering, nothing out of place. They said maybe we were dreaming, maybe we imagined it, maybe stress had gotten to us. But I know what I saw, and one thing has kept me up ever since. Even in the chaos of getting out, I remember looking at the lock. It was still turned to the left, which means the door had been locked the entire time. So how did she get in? And worse, what if she never left? I never thought I'd come online for advice, especially about something like this. I'm used to having all the answers, or at least I'm good at pretending I do. You see, I write an advice column for a small town paper. If anyone could sort this out, it should be me. That's what makes the situation feel even more hopeless. This is the part where I'm supposed to say I know how crazy it sounds. I don't. I know how it reads. I know how you're probably tilting your head right now. Skeptical, but curious. The way I do when I get letters for my column about cheating husbands or truant kids. Despite never fully knowing what I was doing, I always had the language to make others think I did. But I don't have language for this. I just have him. Let me back up. My son is 8. Was 8. I don't know anymore. We were at the park for a playgroup thing. Other moms, other kids. Same place we'd gone every month since he was 3. Wood chips, a few slides. Patch of woods we always said was too thin to get lost in. He was playing hide and seek. He was always good at that. Almost too good. Clever in a way that made you worry what he'd grow into. I remember someone joking, "He's either gonna be a world leader or a criminal mastermind." They started calling his name. "You won, come on out." But he didn't. They kept calling and something inside me shifted, like a lost, ancient instinct we outgrew centuries ago, like a sixth sense I didn't know I had. I don't remember most of the day, not in order, just pieces. My phone slipping out of my shaking hands when I tried to call 911, my knees hitting the dirt, a ranger saying the words, no sign of a struggle, like that was supposed to help. They found nothing, no footprints, no fibers, no blood, just nothing. The search lasted 2 weeks, 14 days of reporters, K9 units, and whispers behind hands. 14 nights of dreaming about body bags and waking up to check his room. I kept the door open, like I expected him to just appear again, curled up in his sheets, annoyed I was making a fuss. And during that time I became a shell of a person, voice raw from screaming his name, feet numb from chasing shadows, and eyes dry with no tears left. If you never lost a child, I don't think it's a feeling you can put into words. The regret, the devastation, the anger, the emptiness, the fear, the agonizing, burning self-hatred. You can try to sympathize, you can try to understand, but you never will. 2 weeks later, I got a call at 3:12 a.m. They'd found him walking along a logging road 6 miles from the park. He was cold, disoriented, but alive. When I saw him at the station, I melted, just dropped. My body shut down with relief. I hugged him and he let me, but he didn't hug back. He was in shock. I knew that. The officer said as much. This would take some time. The first night back, he slept in my bed. I watched him breathe like it was the most fragile thing in the world, holding his little body in my arms. I remember whispering, "I'll never let you go, ever again." I meant it then. Now I'm not sure who I brought home. It's little things. That's how it always starts, right? Little things you tell yourself not to notice. He doesn't remember where he was. That's what they told me to expect. Trauma, amnesia, some protective thing the brain does. But it's not just that he forgot. It's that he doesn't seem to think there's anything to remember. He stares at me blankly when I ask. Not confused, not scared. Just blank. Like the questions in a language he never learned. He struggles with showering, getting dressed, anything that involves changing clothes. I had to compromise by letting him shower in his underwear, or else he won't even touch the water. He walks like he's copying someone, every step a second behind. He hums to himself now, but not songs I recognize. Just slow, disjointed notes out of tune. It's been weeks and these new habits still haven't went away. He calls me Mom, but it doesn't sound right. Like the shape of the word is right, but the soul of it is missing. Like hearing your name from a stranger pretending to know you. Last night I caught him standing in the hallway, not moving, just standing, staring at the wall like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "Making sure no one's here." I laughed. I don't know why. It wasn't funny. It just short-circuited my brain. I told his therapist. I was careful. I said I thought the trauma had changed him, that he seemed different. She said that was normal, that kids process fear in strange ways. I nodded and pretended to agree. Then I went home and locked my bedroom door for the first time in my life. He eats less now, sleeps less. I think he even blinks less. I've checked his body for marks, scars, anything. I don't even know what I'm looking for. Some proof that what I feel isn't just panic unraveling me from the inside out, but everything's where it should be. Same cowlick, same chipped front tooth, same tiny freckle behind his left ear. But I know that's not my son. It's not a dream. It's not paranoia. It's not some post-trauma spiral. It's something else, and I don't know what to do. If anyone's been through this, if anyone's ever felt this, please say something. Tell me I'm wrong, or tell me I'm not. The internet is filled with stories about people who clip out of reality and into somewhere else. Terms like backrooms, states, woods are common on Reddit, and I'm not here to argue semantics with you. I call them fairy pockets. But even that is just a term I made up, so use what you like. There are no word police, not that I have found yet. There are no set rules by which one enters a fairy pocket. Sometimes you just slip in by accident, though there's usually an easy way out, if you know what to look for. Something that will just not look right, and help you pull yourself back to reality. It's hard to explain. My job is that I find them, go into them, and figure out what, if anything, is valuable there, and then sell all information to governments or private businesses. You would be shocked at the amount of natural resources some of these places hold. I can assure you that the Iraq War was not about oil without a shadow of a doubt, but they're always dangerous, so it's a tough call on whether or not they're worth it, and thank God, not mine to make. Usually you can find some idiots willing to buy your dangerous claim for at least enough to break even, unless it's Rockport. Nobody even tries to claim that godforsaken place anymore. Today, I'm just going to tell you about a few places I found, and then, if there are any questions, I'll try and answer them. So without further ado, let's start with Pittsburgh's Infinite City. There is this one place in downtown Pittsburgh, about 2 blocks from the old US Steel building, where if you follow a complicated set of turns and steps, which I can't disclose due to an NDA, you will find yourself in a near-endless, entirely abandoned cityscape of almost identical brick tenements. It, as far as I could tell, served no real practical use to the people I sold it to, but mine is not to reason why. They paid well, and I don't question money on general principle. That said, the thing that struck me as most strange about this place wasn't how empty it was or who built it, being a total mystery. I always have assumed something built these places. No, the strangest part of this was that every single turn, or any other piece of writing I could find in this city, was written in what I eventually identified as a 14th century dialect of Polish. That's a nice and simple one, not really scary, though I confess, all those empty buildings did get eerie, but most of the things I find are like that. A little off-putting perhaps, but not anything special. And this memoir is dedicated more to my horrific experiences after all. They're the ones that make for good stories. Now, some places like that feel creepy, but are fine. Others, like what we'll talk about next, feel fine but are potentially dangerous. If you've ever taken a road trip through Kansas, you'll know how flat it is, but perhaps one or two of you, while driving, have thought you saw a mountain way off in the distance. You probably stopped and shook your head, maybe rubbed your eyes, and it was gone. Good, it doesn't exist, and it can't hurt you, unless you drive exactly 4 miles over the speed limit for 20 minutes while staring at the mountain, then take a sharp left onto a dirt road between 2 cornfields, with a wooden sign on an archway over it. The sign may or may not say anything. That tends to change for some reason. The dirt farm road will soon turn into a paved highway, and you will be in Hanscom County. It's a nice place if you don't mind the smell of sulfur. It's a geothermal hotspot, and the entire place stinks of eggs. The locals are nice, hard-working folks who will give you the shirt off their back, and really are fine people. But take my advice and don't go to any of the churches in the county. They all have the same preacher who tells the same sermon every week, like a recording, and the people can get violent if you ever looked bored during it. Other than that, it's a great place to live, with property values that can't be beat, on account of the fact that I am fairly certain it's still 1973 there. A few hundred miles away, there's one place in the Midwest. Again, for legal reasons, I can't tell exactly how to find. What I can tell is that it's a small regional airport in a big-ish city. That's all I can say. The vending machines all sell products that aren't in business anymore, but I am not entirely sure if that's supernatural or just some strange gimmick on the part of the airport management. What is weird is that if you walk into one specific women's bathroom on a Tuesday, there will be an elevator at the far end of the room past the last sink. It takes you up through 99 floors, 98 of which are identical open-plan office space. You cannot see the skyscraper from outside the airport, and actually, some planes fly right through where it should be. Every floor is the same, laid out in long rows of desks with big box computers, and off-white landline phones with wood-grain siding. Each station manned by workers dressed in business casual, talking on phones and generally doing what you'd expect from a call center. The only issue is that they are speaking exclusively in dead languages. Latin, Proto-Finnic, Occitan. I even heard some Akkadian when I was there. Honestly, it's the most well-managed office I've ever seen. Everyone works hard, and nothing ever goes majorly missing, which I suspect has something to do with the fact, as far as I could tell, there were no managers to screw things up. I went up to floor 99, but decided against floor 100. You see, 99 was a waiting room like you'd find at a doctor's office, and to access floor 100, you had to take the stairs. The sounds coming from up there cannot be described, and I do mean cannot. I have tried repeatedly, and it only leads to my having a seizure. Not wanting to repeat that, I will leave them to your imagination. A buddy of mine who is a priest suggested that I found purgatory, and perhaps he was right. I'm no theologian, so I'll leave that one to the church. There is an area in San Francisco where you can see what I think is Atlantis, where Alcatraz should be, but I haven't figured out how to get there yet. And there is a way to get to the moon from Houston without NASA being involved. But by far the weirdest fairy pocket I ever found was Mount Prince Nelson National Park in West Virginia. It's a beautiful place, by the way. Wonderful hiking, and some absolutely stunning views of the mountains. But I don't recommend you take your kids. It's by far the most dangerous place I have ever been, and I lived in Chicago for 3 months. Long story. I was trying to figure out where all the damned clowns kept coming from, but I digress. Mount Prince Nelson is about 700 square miles, located within an area of West Virginia, no larger than a Walmart parking lot, which coincidentally is how you get there. Follow the steps correctly, and where the main doors are, a stone arch will appear with an NPS ranger who charges you 42 cents as an entry fee, and hands you a waiver to sign in the reasonably likely event that you die in the park. There are miles and miles of roads, both paved and unpaved, and a core area around a lake that contains the majority of the tourist stuff. It's more or less safe on account of the National Park Service maintaining a round-the-clock watch on the perimeter. That would make the Marines look sloppy, and the flight of F-14 Eagle fighter jets flying 24/7. Hot laps around the area is a great comfort, but we weren't paid to be comfortable, and our bosses wanted us deeper in the park and off-trail. Once you get outside of the patrolled area, like we were, things take a turn. Everything, and I do mean everything, wants to kill you. There are beetles, the size of cars, for starters. The cool parts, however, is the dinosaurs that roam free in the park. Side note, that whole "they can't see you if you don't move" thing is bull. Ask me how I know. It's a rainforest, so the backwoods camping isn't easy, because hacking your way off trail is a nightmare even without the venomous trees and psychic frogs. But I have to say, it really is beautiful. Puts Yellowstone to shame on a bad day, and that's saying it mildly. When I first went to Mount Prince Nelson, I was part of a team of specialists called in by the National Park Service to figure out why they kept getting paperwork from their employees there despite no knowledge of it existing. We spent about 6 months figuring out how to get in, and that's when things started to go badly wrong. Our team lead, an older guy named Donald, was the first to die. He had taken watch around our camp on the first nights after we left the safe zone, and some kind of big ape-looking thing came out of the woods and attacked. Beat poor Danny half to death before we were able to kill it, and he was dead by the time we got him back to a ranger station for a medevac. We had a job to do, and the pay was good, so we pushed on, deeper into the woods, where the 9 surviving men of our team got knocked down to 5 on the 3rd day by some kind of screaming fog. Though all things considered, it wasn't so bad, as it also killed the T-Rex that was chasing us. Jacoby, one of the newbies, went nuts that night and started talking about how he had communed with a goddess at the center of the mountain in his sleep, and that he needed to go out and join her amidst the rocks lest all reality be consumed. I had to put him down with my .45 before the crazy spread to the rest of the team, which might be my least favorite part of this job. The remaining 4 of us found an old cabin nearby and decided to hold up for the night. By the next morning, we were down to 3. I hadn't gotten to Jacoby in time, I guess. We reached the decision that we were going to try and make our way back to the safe zone after a short debate. I always try to be democratic where possible, so we started back. When we had been walking for around 7 hours, Rodriguez, who was on point, signaled a halt. He said he thought he had heard a twig break about 100 yards to our right. He was right, to worse luck. If he hadn't stopped, maybe he wouldn't have been able to line up his shot. The arrow took Rodriguez in the chest, sending him to the ground. Me and O'Leary opened up with our weapons in the direction of the archer, but I don't think we hit him. Rodriguez would have survived had the arrow not been poisoned, but he was already turning green and bleeding from his eyes by the time I got the bandage over the wound. I gave him last rites by sticking a stake through his heart and zip-tying a cross to his right hand so he wouldn't come back as anything unnatural. Then the 2 of us left and set off again in the direction of home. O'Leary and I made it a long way that day without stopping, and ended up coming close enough to the safe zone that we were fairly confident in making it there the next day. I took first watch and chewed coffee grounds to stay awake, as I had no doubts that we were still being hunted. The attack came sometime around 0:30, when I got a feeling on the back of my neck that I was being watched. I have learned to listen to these feelings, and it's why I'm still alive. Diving for the ground, the arrow just narrowly missed me, slamming into a tree a few yards behind. O'Leary was awake now and scrambling for his rifle, while I fired blindly into the trees from cover. We were unlikely to make it back without getting rid of this hunter, so I signaled for him to cover me as I crawled away from our camp. It took about 10 minutes or so before I found his tracks. 2 muddy boot prints and a Snickers wrapper gave way where he had been standing, and a trail of greenish-blue blood leading away from the spot told me one of us had hit him. O'Leary and I stalked him for about half a mile before we found him collapsed by a creek bed, panting heavily, a handsome young man dressed in bright orange hunting gear. The only sign he wasn't human was the metallic red hair and his almost neon green eyes. He cussed me out in what must have been an early ancestor of Welsh, before O'Leary blew his brains all over the forest floor. I wasn't sure that would stop him for long, so just to be safe, I hog-tied him before we left. O'Leary quit this job after we made it back to civilization. I can't blame him. The last I heard, he had become a Buddhist monk and lived up some mountain in Colorado. I just hoped it wasn't anywhere near Rockport. That is one pocket that even I won't go to. But the pay from the National Park Service was more than enough for me to retire on, had I wanted to. So there are certainly perks to this job. Why do I still do it? I would love to get philosophical, but frankly, I just like it. It tickles the part of the human spirit that first pushed man to sail across oceans or fly to the moon. And like those great explorers of the past, I'm not sure I could stop even if I wanted to. It has its hooks in me, and won't let go. I have other stories, of course, might even post them later, but these were a few that stood out to me. I will try to answer any questions, but given the number of NDAs and ancient blood oaths I've had to sign over the years, I make no promises about how much I can deliver. That said, if this job sounds fun to you, or the money sounds like a great way to get rich quick, I really do not recommend you take it up. People like that don't tend to last long, and for the love of all that is holy, if you are in Colorado and see a sign for a town called Rockport, turn around. Has anyone stayed at 237 Stillwater Road? I clean Airbnbs for a living. I've been doing it for about 2 years now, and have recently started my own cleaning company. I used to work for a larger management company, but had some difficulties with my boss and the way the business was run. So I quit and started managing a couple on my own. It doesn't pay too much, but I get to work on my own time, and I'm my own boss. A large majority of the Airbnbs I clean are mom and pop operations, and since they don't have the time to do it themselves, they pay me to tidy up between guests. Most of the properties are left relatively clean, but every once in a while we get crappy clients that will trash the place for a party, or God knows what else. The worst I've had to do is scrub dried puke or throw away the occasional used condom, but it's worth it to be my own boss. I do most of my business through Craigslist, advertising my cleaning services to anyone in the area who may need help with their place. About a month ago, someone replied to my listing with nothing but the address of their property, the amount I could expect to be paid, and the first date it required cleaning. 237 Stillwater Road, $125, June 24th, 12 p.m. Although this may seem strange to someone new or unfamiliar with the business, it's fairly common for messages from the host to be this simple. It was part of the reason I enjoyed the job. I've never been a people person, so I enjoyed the simplicity of the limited interaction I had with people. I responded saying I could take the job, and didn't give it a second thought. The rental looked run down from the outside, in desperate need of a paint job to replace the peeling white paint on the exterior. The rotting and curled shingles only exacerbated the weary look of the house. Nestled on the top of a steep hill, it overlooked the vast and deep Stillwater Lake, which coincidentally harbored a few of the other houses I maintained. It was one story with an unfinished basement, indicated by the concrete foundation and the windows peeking just over the grass. However, the inside was a different story. The moment I stepped in, something felt off. Not wrong exactly, just too clean. Walking through the house, I found 2 fully furnished bedrooms, a kitchen, an attached garage converted into a game room, and a couple of doors I assumed led to closets. It was as if it had not been touched in weeks. I absently noted this as strange, as the listing said that the previous occupant had left no less than 2 hours ago. Walking through the house, not a single pillow or sheet in the bedrooms looked to be disturbed. No dishes sat in the sink waiting to be scrubbed. No crumbs or dirt dotted the carpet or stained wood floor. It's not uncommon for occupants to clean up the rental in order to avoid a large cleaning fee, but I'd never seen a rental this sterile. However, I pride myself on being thorough, and decided to replace the sheets as well as vacuum the floors just to be safe. Upon getting to the kitchen, I noticed a door in the corner I did not previously register. Stuck to the door was another detail I must have passed over on the initial walkthrough. A pinned note displayed a simple request written in neat handwriting. Replace salt in water softener. Through the door was a dark stairway leading into the basement. A lot of these old rentals had me do this as part of the routine. It was a menial task, but was inconvenient enough for me to often forget about, as they were usually out of the way, in basements or garages or other places that I rarely had any reason to go. Forgetting was generally not a big deal though, as these salt-dependent water softeners can often go weeks without being replenished. Since it was the first time I had cleaned this rental, and the owner had explicitly asked for it, I decided to not take the chance that it could wait. About halfway down the stairs, I realized that the light from the open kitchen door was failing. I turned around to realize that the door was shutting, and raced to the top of the steps. My initial panic was met with the realization that the door was simply on old hinges, and naturally closes on its own. A cold shiver ran up my spine as I understood that both the descent and ascent would have to be made in complete darkness. I'd never been afraid of the dark, basements, or anything like that, but there was something unsettling about being alone in an unfamiliar house, one that had hosted countless strangers, owned by someone I'd only exchanged a few brief messages with. It left me more uneasy than I could ever remember feeling. Still, I told myself this was something I had to do. Making it down to the hanging chain attached to the bulb was no big deal. A swift walk down the stairs and I could easily make out the chain before the door fully closed. I'd bet that even a relaxed walk could allow me to pull it in time, but that was not something I had the nerve to test. The basement of the rental was the stereotypical Midwestern unfinished basement. Concrete floors and exposed wooden beams. It reminded me of my childhood home. I was greeted by the pungent mildew smell, the damp and suffocating odor, considerably stronger than the average basement. The singular light bulb swayed on its chain, casting strange, long shadows around the room. A negligible amount of light was filtered through the grimy windows, haphazardly covered with cardboard, illuminating dust motes with their weak beams. There was old junk lining the walls of most of the basement on shelves or in boxes, undoubtedly the source of the musty smell. The water softener was tucked into one of the four corners, nestled between the washer and dryer. The salt in the water softener was completely empty. Typically, it takes about a month or a 4-person family to go through the salt if it is fully filled. Either the salt hadn't been replaced in about a month, if it was full to begin with, or this rental somehow uses an almost impossible amount of water. Puzzled, but eager to get out of the basement, I poured one of the salt bags stacked against the side of the water softener and into the maw of the machine. As I turned to leave, I noticed a peculiarity under the stairs. A circular dark spot resembling water damage was situated between the wooden supports, holding up the flight. As I approached it curiously, I realized it was not simply a black spot, but a damp and yawning opening, stretching an indiscernible distance into the foundation of the house. The jagged rim bore evidence of man-made tools, likely a primitive and homemade well due to the antiquity of the house. Whatever cavernous depths the well reached into was hidden from the light of the singular bulb. I grabbed a loose pebble from the crude concrete floor and dropped it into the mouth. I waited for the response, and received none. I contemplated leaving the basement light on and calling it a day, but it was my first time cleaning this rental, and I was determined to leave no trace of the presence. Additionally, there was the possibility that the occupants would not find the light and turn it off, and the thought of having to replace the burnt-out bulb in the complete darkness made my skin crawl. I took a deep breath and tugged the chain down, plunging myself into complete darkness. As I did so, the sound of the pebble echoed back, winding tortuously and intoxicatingly from the back throat of the well. I still have the scar from running up the stairs. I told myself I wouldn't sprint, but as soon as I yanked the cord of the bulb, a fear I haven't felt since childhood swept over me. My mind conjured forms in the darkness behind me, fangs and nails scraping the air furiously inches away from my calves as I launched myself up the stairs, their shape changing from every step. I yelped as my foot caught on one of the steps, and as my knee connected with the stairs, radiating a sharp pain out from my kneecap, I scrambled to get myself up, wincing at the sharp pain, and clambered up the remaining steps. I half expected the door to be locked when I made it to the small landing at the crest of the stairs, and let out a relieved sigh as I collapsed through the doors into the kitchen. The shapes in my mind evaporated at the presence of the dying summer light pouring in through the kitchen windows. I let my face blush with the shame of the last 10 seconds, but another part of me insisted that my fear was justified. Attempting to shake this feeling off, I did my final walkthrough of the house. By now the adrenaline had worn off, and my leg throbbed with the memory of my tumble. After I was sure everything was up to my standards, I bolted the front door, limped out to my car, and drove off. I have been cleaning this rental for just over a month now. Every time is the same. The house is immaculate when I arrive. There is a new note on the door to the basement, written in the same handwriting, but written on a different sticky note or with slight variations in the print. The water softener is always empty, and I always dump salt to the fill line. For each bag of salt I go through, a new bag replaces the one I have used up the next time I show up. I have now ceased cleaning the rest of the rental. I exclusively replace the salt and ponder over the well. The well has become a source of morbid fascination for me. Sometimes I stare into the fissure for what seems like hours, only to return from the trance and realize barely a minute has passed. I continue to drop pebbles, waiting in almost erotic anticipation for the distant echo. A single thing varies, though. I am more terrified of the basement each time I go. The shapes are closer. Sometimes I think I feel them brush my shirt or pant leg when I run up the stairs in the dark. Maybe I do. I've started to bring a flashlight on my daily trip into the basement, but this does little to reduce the thoughts in the back of my mind. I bring it regardless, as it's better than nothing. This notion of something else being in the room with me has started to follow me throughout the house. At first I felt it only when I was in the basement. Then I felt it in the kitchen. Now I feel it when I enter the house. I have cleaned it every day since the first day. Every night the owner will contact me with the address of the rental, the amount I can expect to be paid, tomorrow's date, and the time they expect me to clean it. I have never seen anyone staying there, nor any evidence of inhabitants within the house. But the house is always clean. I have never dusted, but no dust accumulates on the untouched furniture or shelves. No indentations on the couch where someone might have recently sat. The dishes are always in the same spot, none left out in the sink for me to clean. I have never even seen a car sitting in the driveway, or a light on while simply passing by. There is something off about the reviews of this rental online. It is almost as if they are AI generated. They follow a very formulaic structure, with many of them sharing many phrases like, "feels like home," or "we look forward to staying again." All of them are 5 stars, and not a single one says anything critical about the property. The incessant mystery has festered in me like a wound, bringing me to yesterday's events. I stood under the light bulb, its dangling chain in my right hand, my flashlight heavy in my left. I inhaled deeply, pulled my right hand down, and plunged the room into utter darkness. My clammy hands fumbled to find the button, illuminating the well upon its location. I cautiously approached the pit, angling my flashlight down its gullet. Though apparently graded for military use, the beam from the flashlight was swallowed eagerly by the pit's ebony gloom. I waited. In the lack of visual or auditory input, the brain tends to make its own stimulus, so when I saw a faint reflection at the edge of the flashlight's reach, I thought it was simply this phenomena in action. The reflection continued to expand, shimmering as it grew in intensity, so much so that I was almost convinced that the flashlight's reach had somehow been extended to whatever depths the water table lay at. The reflections grew in their intensity, and with a terrifying beauty I can't begin to describe, I realized that the light cast back wasn't of that of water. It was that of innumerable eyes. My blood ran cold, and I watched in detached horror as my flashlight tumbled into the inky darkness. Consciousness returned. After how long, I am still not sure. I ran panicked through the darkness towards where I assumed the staircase was. I fumbled around and located the cool banister, using it to propel myself up the stairs. On the 5th step, the decaying wood gave way, robbing me of my momentum. I caught myself with the assistance of the railing, but upon attempting to pull myself up, the two ends of the broken board snared my right leg, tearing at the skin on my ankle. I tried to pull myself out of the stairs, which only served to push the splintered step further into my leg. Gritting my teeth and rotating my body, I felt for the cracked wood. My finger brushed a jagged edge, pain shooting up my arm as a splinter slid under my fingernail. A carrion, rotting smell suffocated me. I gagged. With my left leg and my remaining strength, I kicked a side of the board with panicked fervor. The first kick only served to drive the splintered wood further into my tender flesh. I was certain that this is how it would end. The second did the same, but I could feel the rotted wood giving way. Adrenaline surged, dulling the pain into something distant and unreal. On the third, the board snapped. I was free. I clumsily pulled myself along on my stomach. Reaching the crest, I fumbled for the doorknob and threw the door open. If God is merciful, then it will someday relieve me of the horrid sight that dying light illuminated. Scores of them line the staircase, their limp-like bodies twisting and convulsing in an attempt to escape the soft glow of the sun. Their skin spread thin and pale over their bony bodies, revealing twisted and purple varicose veins over their ape-like bodies. The horde clawed over each other, tearing flesh from their leprous bodies, and spilling their ichor in a deafening silence. They oozed and slithered down the stairwell, indeterminable in their numbers, but an amalgamation of claws, fangs, and atrophied wings. In places, skin bubbled and burst, emitting a foul and indescribable stench. As the last of the monstrosities vanished into their antediluvian crypt, they left behind only the shattered stair, and the trail of blood marking my escape. Although I struggle to recall what followed, they say a good Samaritan found me, babbling, incoherent. I was taken to a nearby hospital, where I've remained ever since. Despite my insistence, the doctors claim there's no rental listing for 237 Stillwater Road, just a long abandoned house. But I know the truth. I know what I saw. Periodically I still hear it, the sweet, distant echo rising from the well, calling me back. I know I will return, and when I do, I will know just how deep the well goes. I moved into this house a week ago. Nothing special, just a one-bedroom with scuffed floors, peeling paint, and a draft that whispered through the cracks when the wind picked up. Rent was cheap and I didn't ask questions. I couldn't afford to. The first few days were fine, dusty, quiet. maybe too quiet. I slept like crap, but that wasn't new. I figured it was just the usual insomnia, or the leftover anxiety still chewing at my gut after months of couch hopping. But then something shifted. At first it was just a feeling, that subtle itch between your shoulder blades, like someone's watching you, but you're alone. I'd walk into the kitchen and feel eyes on my back, turn off the bathroom light and feel like I had to run to the bedroom. Silly stuff. Childhood fears. I told myself I was adjusting. But a few nights ago, something happened I can't explain. I was lying on the couch late at night, TV on mute. The only light in the room came from the screen and the bulb behind me in the hallway. I'd left it on without thinking. Something about the dark in this place felt too heavy. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw something peeking around the edge of the hallway door. 2 eyes, low to the ground, pale, wide, unblinking. They vanished the second I turned to look. Just gone. Like they'd never been there at all. I told myself it was a trick of the light. Maybe a reflection. Maybe I was just tired. But I couldn't shake the image. Those eyes, there was something off about them. Not wrong in an obvious way, just enough to make my stomach knot. They didn't blink, didn't shift, just stared like they were trying to memorize me. 3 nights ago, I tried to take a shower. I'd just stepped under the water, curtain only half drawn, because even then, something about closing it all the way made me uneasy. I wasn't thinking about that though. I was rinsing shampoo from my hair, eyes stinging. When I opened them, I saw a part of a face peeking through the edge of the curtain. Just a sliver, pale skin, a sharp cheekbone, half an eye, too wide and too still. It was just standing there watching me. No sound, no movement, just there. I froze, heartbeat in my throat. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just stared. And then slowly it slid back out of view. Gone. Like it had just wanted me to know it could get that close. I haven't been in that bathroom since. I taped the door shut the next morning and started using the kitchen sink for everything else. I sleep with the hallway light on now. Not because it helps, but because dark corners make it worse. That same night, I set up my phone in the hallway facing the corner. The one just outside the bathroom. The one where I kept feeling it. I turned on the motion detection, opened the live feed on my laptop, and stayed up watching. Hours passed. Nothing. Then around 3:17 a.m., the feed cut to black for 7 full seconds. When it came back, the camera was tilted slightly to the left. I didn't touch it. I started moving differently through the house, walking sideways so I could keep corners in view. Mirrors went up in every room, on tables, door frames, even taped to the ceiling above my bed so I could keep an eye on the hallway without leaving my room. It helped a little, but I had to sleep sometime, and that's when it got closer. I blinked. That's all it took. One blink. My eyes were burning from hours of staring at the hallway. I just needed a moment. I let them close and heard the couch scrape softly across the floor behind me. When I turned, it had shifted. Not much, just an inch. But it was no longer flush with the bedroom door. Something had nudged it from the other side. That's when I realized it doesn't move if I'm watching. That's the rule. It waits just out of sight. It only moves when you're not looking. The next morning, the bathroom door was open. The duct tape I'd used to seal it had been peeled off slowly, deliberately, like someone didn't want to make a sound. I didn't go near it. I didn't touch the tape. I just backed away and left it alone. Later that day, I called the landlord. I tried to stay calm, asked if anything weird had happened in the house, if other tenants ever complained. He got quiet, then he said, "You're not the first one to ask about that." When I pushed for more, he said, "If you're smart, you'll find somewhere else." Then he hung up. He won't answer my calls now. Things aren't staying in the same place anymore. Not just furniture, walls. I know how that sounds, but I swear it's true. The hallway feels shorter now. I keep bumping into things I never used to. Shadows fall differently. Corners are tighter. I measured everything. The numbers say nothing's changed. But when I walk through the house now, it feels like it's watching me back. Or worse, like it's folding in around me. I've stopped looking at mirrors. A few nights ago, I glanced at one on the dresser and saw myself smiling. I wasn't smiling. Sometimes I'll see something slipping out of frame when I turn my head. Always left, always behind. I don't turn my head anymore. I just keep walking, keep watching. Because if I don't, it'll move. And if it moves, I think it can finally reach me. About an hour ago, I found the front door wide open. Not unlocked, not damaged, just open. And nothing in the house had moved. Nothing knocked over. Nothing taken. It felt like an invitation, like it was giving me a chance. I didn't take it. Because here's the thing, I think that's the choice. Leave and it follows. Run and it stays close. But stay? Stay and it finally comes in. I'm writing this from bed. The camcorder screen is black. Not paused, not frozen, just off. I didn't turn it off. The hallway is quiet now. The light's still on, but it feels like it doesn't matter anymore. I haven't turned my head in over an hour. I can feel something breathing just behind me. I think it's already in the room. I know the rule now. It only moves when I'm not watching. So I'm going to sit here, eyes open, wide, burning, and if I blink... Final edit. If you're reading this, don't look away. Not even for a second. Because it might be in your house now, too.